Chapter 421, The Sixth Complex. Ethan had arranged for Clark to meet Homelander. After all, they were destined to become teammates. Homelander greeted Clark with that unwavering, faintly condescending grin of his. "Nice to meet you, little Superman," he said, extending a hand. Clark's face brightened with his trademark sunny enthusiasm. "Hello, Homelander," he replied, clasping the pro-hero's hand firmly. His smile shone with an almost blinding sincerity. Homelander recoiled inwardly at that brightness. The grin felt too perfect, too rehearsed, so artificial it set his teeth on edge. Standing quietly to one side, Ethan watched them both. He could read their unspoken thoughts as easily as if they'd been spoken out loud. In many ways, Homelander and Clark were mirror images, except that when Homelander faced his own reflection, all he saw was humiliation. Despite Ethan's relentless training regimen, designed to harden Clark into a ruthless instrument, Clark's innate kindness remained unshaken. Ethan had taught him the logic of permanent solutions, neutralize supercriminals completely so they could never harm innocents again. Clark nodded and learned the techniques, but when it came down to it, he refused to kill. Instead, he followed Batman's example, maiming rather than delivering a fatal blow, and left his enemies crippled, unable to hurt anyone ever again. To Ethan's pragmatic mind, that brand of mercy was, paradoxically, more cruel than his own. For a moment, Ethan couldn't decide whether Clark's offer was an act of kindness or something far more sinister. After all, keeping these wounded cripples on the payroll would drain resources, like throwing good money after bad. Yet Clark was positively beaming, and Ethan found himself unable to speak up. The whole situation felt maddening. "From today on," Clark declared, "Homelander and Little Superman, you two will be sent out on joint missions to drum up more interest. We'll have a full live broadcast crew trailing you everywhere. Just remember, no harming innocent bystanders on camera, no profanity, and always keep smiling." The production team was nothing if not thorough. They'd seen how quickly human rights groups in America could turn the tide of public opinion, so they were determined to keep every video squeaky clean. And yet, with demons and monsters now roaming the streets, threats of every shape and size, people were hungrier than ever for heroic spectacle. Concerns about bad press had become secondary. What no one suspected was that Ethan hadn't just brought back monster cells from the One Punch Man world. He'd also imported its very idea of monsters. Soon, this world would face creatures born not only of science, but of pure, unbridled terror, and neither superheroes nor cameras would be prepared for what was coming. Ethan duplicated and then deployed this same mechanism across the United States. In the DC universe, negative emotions aren't just fleeting feelings. They have a tangible power, capable of giving birth to monsters. Now, thanks to America's abundance of resentment, hatred, and fear, these creatures are beginning to emerge en masse. Originally, Ethan kept that surge of negativity in check, which is why the country didn't immediately suffer an all-out monster apocalypse. Had 100 dragon-level behemoths appeared at once, it would have been nothing short of an extinction-level event. But by stifling each outbreak as it surfaced, he delayed a full-scale disaster. Unfortunately, the downside of this approach is that the suppressed negativity just keeps piling up. If it isn't allowed to vent gradually, it could one day spawn a horde of god-tier abominations. For now, the strategy is to let the smaller waves of monsters break, then knock them down, containing the damage before it grows truly catastrophic. Today's test case is a rampaging rhino beast tearing through downtown Chicago. The local police were completely outmatched. Even a gunship's machine guns bounced off its hide, and in the end, they lost the helicopter. Now, the authorities have no choice but to call in the heavy hitters from the Superman company, namely Homelander and Clark Kent, to bring this creature down before it levels half the city. Currently, Superman Corp maintains a cooperative relationship with the U.S. government, though it isn't an official agency. The truth is, the military-industrial complex has long since solidified into a powerful coalition, and it isn't easy to break into. Even Ethan's family, with all its influence in defense circles, couldn't do it alone. The military-industrial complex comprises the armed forces, defense contractors, certain members of Congress, and research institutions. Because it spans the military, private industry, and the legislature, its reach is vast. In fact, the United States has come to rely on private firms to drive its defense economy. In recent years, the top 3 contractors for the Department of Defense have been Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman. Of those, Lockheed Martin, primarily a manufacturer of military aircraft and missiles, stands out as the archetypal, pure defense contractor. Northrop Grumman is one of America's truly pure defense contractors, devoted almost entirely to missile systems and other military hardware. Boeing, by contrast, straddles both worlds. It's best known for its commercial airliners, but also fulfills sizable orders for the U.S. Department of Defense. In 2007 alone, the Pentagon awarded Northrop Grumman $27.8 billion in contracts, Boeing $22.5 billion, and Lockheed Martin $14.6 billion. Alongside them, General Dynamics, Raytheon, and Britain's BAE Systems rank among the largest recipients of U.S. defense spending. Taken together, these firms form the core of the military-industrial complex, a vast, interlocking network of corporate interests, the Pentagon, and key members of Congress that effectively shape American and even European defense policy. But influence doesn't stop there. The Ethan family, no strangers to boardrooms or Capitol Hill, holds sway not only within this defense cartel, but across 5 other titanic power blocks. These informal 5 mountains, though not official state bodies, press down on the American people just as relentlessly as any government edict. There are 5 great mountains of power in modern America. 1, the military-industrial complex. 2, the medical establishment. 3, the legal profession. 4, Wall Street finance. 5, the education media network. Because Ethan moved early, the Luthor family now holds significant stakes in each of these spheres, and with that, a solid measure of influence. Yet even with Superman Industries on their side, they've never fully broken into the military-industrial complex. That, however, is no longer their primary objective. The Luthors' true ambition is to build a 6th mountain, not merely a coalition of heroes, but a fully integrated superhuman complex. In essence, they intend to unite every individual with extraordinary abilities into a single, powerful interest group. Such a superhuman complex would be far more formidable and far less predictable than the military-industrial complex. Superhumans bring to the table raw, uncontrollable power born of mutation. If Ethan succeeds, the Luthor family won't just rank among the great power blocks. They'll quietly become the real power brokers behind the scenes, eclipsing even the traditional defense establishment. The 5 major factions would never publicly endorse an initiative like this. Outwardly, they all refused, but behind closed doors, each one quietly offered its support. They'd long since perfected the art of hedging their bets, eager to block any new power block from taking hold, yet equally determined to claim a stake in its success. To them, this was merely a test. Should the fledgling alliance collapse, its remnants would simply be carved up and absorbed by whoever was strongest. Chapter 422, Abstract Teen Titans. The city quaked under another onslaught of the rhinoceros monsters. Skyscrapers shook, windows shattered, and panicked citizens flooded into the streets. From the air, news helicopters from the New York Times, Fox News, and CNN circled relentlessly, their reporters shouting into cameras over the roar of destruction. We're witnessing absolute chaos downtown. The police are powerless, an anchor breathlessly reported from one live feed. The National Guard has just arrived, but can they stop these creatures? Below them, the National Guardsmen engage the monsters with rifles and armored vehicles, only to be cut down or thrown aside in moments. It was as if these beasts were invulnerable. Civilians watched in horror. Do we have any hope left but to rely on those so-called heroes? One bystander muttered, eyes wide with despair. High above the wreckage, the private helicopters of Superman Company hovered like vultures. For months, the government had tolerated their presence, granting them access to disaster zones in exchange for secrecy and discretion. But today's rhinoceros monsters had shattered that fragile understanding. Superman Company wasn't here for goodwill or publicity. They demanded recognition, a formal title that would cement their place in the world's eyes and open doors to influence and power. Their executives whispered of a stepping stone that would catapult them to the forefront of every major crisis. Even if the title seemed trivial, or the government viewed it as mere posturing, the Luthor family, now renamed Ethan, had no choice but to comply. Ethan stood on the roof of the Superman Company headquarters, arms crossed as he carnage below. He felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him. The company's investors saw this as their last fig leaf of legitimacy. Without an official endorsement, they could be sidelined, overshadowed by rival corporations, or, worse, exposed as money-hungry opportunists. "It's time," his supervisor said, voice flat over the comms. "Issue the declaration. Make it official." Ethan took a deep breath. He keyed the microphone and spoke clearly into the live feed, beaming to millions. "This is Ethan Luthor of Superman Company. Effective immediately, we are officially recognized as the United States Emergency Defense Agency. We stand ready to protect our cities from any threat, supervillain, monster, or catastrophe. The era of private hands-off is over." Below him, the last of the National Guardsmen fell back, confusion plain on their faces when they saw Superman Company troops disembark in full tactical gear. The monsters, momentarily distracted by the new arrivals, paused their rampage. In that tense moment, as the world watched and waited, the balance of power shifted. The city's fate, perhaps the fate of the entire nation, rested in the hands of these newly self-appointed defenders. And Ethan knew that, from now on, nothing would ever be the same. Ethan's reputation had become such a thorn in their side that the military-industrial complex resorted to desperate measures. They recruited a handful of retired soldiers plagued by post-war PTSD, labeling them mental patients, and even someone codenamed Melaleuca, all with orders to eliminate him. They believed these battle-scarred veterans would be more than a match for a lone man. Instead, every operative was cut down by the freakish agents of Superman Company before they ever got near Ethan. It was then the complex finally grasped the truth. They weren't up against an ordinary criminal, but a prehistoric behemoth whose power dwarfed the combined strength of their forces. At first, that realization thrilled them. After all, they alone controlled America's military procurement and steered the nation's destiny. Other industrial interests simply lined up to take whatever scraps they left behind. But with Superman Company ripping open the status quo, the shadowy figures who truly pulled America's strings faced the risk of being replaced. They'd always clung to the belief that Eve and the most dangerous supercriminal could never surpass an entire country's firepower. Then the rhinoceros-like monster appeared. Standing 3 meters tall, its hide was so thick that even a tank's main gun couldn't pierce it. Shells merely bounced off like peas against a wall. In a single, humiliating affront, the beast shattered their arrogance and forced them to reckon with a new reality. If there's any way to breach its defenses, we still have a chance to neutralize it. Yet, even the tank's main gun failed to scratch the creature. Our tactical analysis team has concluded that only a heavy bomb would guarantee a kill. The catch? Its blast radius is far too large to use in a populated area. The only other option is a missile strike, but our estimates show missiles would be only marginally more effective than the bomb and still risk catastrophic collateral damage. Deploying such firepower downtown would demand someone take the political hit, and no one in this council is volunteering. A tense silence fell until one voice cut through. "Then who can handle it?" "If we let that monster run wild," another member replied, "it will destroy public confidence in us on a global scale. We have no choice." After much debate, they reluctantly approved sending in the elite Superman Company. To prevent any last-minute vetoes or blame-shifting, the entire operation will be broadcast live, simultaneously on the government channel and via the Ethan family's own news network, ensuring an unbroken feed from start to finish. The chief executives of America's 5 biggest conglomerates soon learned what was unfolding and quietly cursed the old fox under their breath. They'd originally planned to look the other way, pretend nothing had happened, and let the Pentagon claim victory once the dust settled. After all, national pride was secondary to their bottom line, and they controlled every major news outlet. But that plan was blown to pieces the moment Superman, officially a citizen of the motherland, went live on air. Every step of his approach was broadcast in real time, and millions watched as America's vaunted National Guard and armed forces failed to slow the monster's advance. Social media went into overdrive. Public anxiety spiked, and with the military overwhelmed, the only option left was to turn to the one organization they'd hoped never to need, Superman Corporation. Superman has arrived at his destination, the anchor announced, voice echoing through living rooms across the country. In that instant, the 5 corporate titans realized they had no choice but to place their fate and America's in Superman Corporation's hands. In the days to come, the public would begin to lose faith in the military, the National Guard, even America itself, and instead place their hopes in the Superman Corporation. Then, live on every screen, Teen Titans attack! Superboy and Homelander shouted the rallying cry into the camera, then leapt from the hovering helicopter. Both of them could fly, of course, so parachutes were unnecessary. On the interactive live stream, Ethan's own creation, comments poured in. Teen Titans? What's that supposed to mean? It's their new second-generation superhero team, the Teen Titans. I love it. Please let Superboy and our Homeland's champion defeat that monster. I never imagined Superboy teaming up with our country's hero. Where are the Fantastic Five right now? They're still kids. Can they really handle this? Ethan watched the flood of bullet chat comments with a mix of pride and apprehension. His platform had gone viral the moment fans discovered its real-time talk on-screen chat feature. Now everyone was glued to the feed, hearts pounding as that hulking creature tore through city blocks like they were paper. Superboy and Homelander had their work cut out for them, and so did the Teen Titans. Monster! Ethan braced himself at the control console and unleashed the Homeland's Cyclops-style beam. A searing scarlet ray lanced out and struck the rhinoceros-like behemoth squarely in the chest. By Punchman standards, this rhino was already a demon-level threat, marginally stronger even than the Deep-Sea King, so Homelander's laser vision, as powerful as it was, barely registered as a scratch. He'd long ago decided he couldn't amplify Homelander any further if he ever wanted to restore him to full strength. Lately, his mind had drifted to grander schemes, a brand new superhero team, something like a distorted Teen Titans, Captain America fused with Soldier Boy, Homelander paired with Superboy, maybe even tricking Batman into joining, rounding out their own twisted Justice League. The possibilities made him smirk. Back on the field, Homelander's eyes didn't slow the rhino one bit, but they did draw its full attention. The black monstrosity, its hide knobbly and slick like Cthulhu's, bellowed in rage and swung a colossal fist at Homelander. Determined to show off for the cameras, Homelander stood his ground. Instead of dodging, he planned to catch the blow midair and hoist the rhino aloft, a signature flex of strength. But real life isn't a comic book. The moment the creature's punch connected, Homelander's elegant, superpowered hand crumpled under the brute force, bone and steel screaming as it buckled. Shock rippled through the watching world. Even the invincible can break. And tonight, Homelander just proved it. In slow motion, her serene composure snapped into sheer panic. Then, boom, Ethan was blasted away like a cannonball, crashing straight through the side of a towering skyscraper. Chapter 423, The Motherlander's Dark History. Ethan hovered in the air, cape fluttering behind him, as the rampaging creature swept through the city's heart. Below, dozens of civilians, brave volunteers who called themselves the Motherlanders, rallied to confront the beast. But despite their fearless charge, the monster's massive tail crashed into them like a wrecking ball, hurling them through shattered storefronts and telephone poles. Ethan's heart pounded. He dived into the fray, fists clenched, but even he could do little more than block a sudden swipe of the creature's claw. One powerful blow sent him skidding across the pavement, dust and debris spraying around him. He gasped for breath, struggling to rise as the city's emergency broadcast buzzed overhead. All around him, thousands of onlookers were tuned in to the live feed, and the comment section erupted. "Ha ha! Did you see that?" The Motherlanders actually blocked that with one hand, and got knocked flat. I managed to screen grab his face. They've never faced anything like this before, yet they act like seasoned heroes. It's hilarious. "Come on, Motherlanders, show us what you're made of. Fight back." Yikes, they wiped out those volunteers again. What's Superman gonna do now? Seriously, what's their armor even made of? That strike tore through 7 buildings, probably tougher than a cannonball. Ethan forced himself to stand, the sting of the blow still fresh in his bones. His eyes roamed the battered street, overturned cars, shattered glass, smoke curling from smoldering ruins. The volunteers lay scattered, groaning, blood trickling from cracked helmets and torn sleeves. Somewhere inside him, a flicker of anger ignited. He could feel the weight of every mocking comment, each one a challenge he could not ignore. Taking a steadying breath, Ethan squared his shoulders. He would show the world that the Motherlanders belonged here, that they could stand and fight no matter the odds. And he would prove to every critic that courage isn't measured by invulnerability, but by the strength to rise again. They tore through 7 city blocks in a single bound before finally coming to a halt. Clark stared up at the rhinoceros monster in stunned silence. Had it come to save the city or to lay waste to it? He'd come here seeking answers about his homeland's fate, but the beast refused to give him a chance. The monster's muscles bulged beneath tough gray skin. With a thunderous crash, it unleashed a shockwave that pulverized everything within hundreds of meters. Then, impossibly, it leapt into the air. Clark's jaw dropped. Such a colossal creature, could it really jump that high? He barely had time to think. Though Clark was born to a noble winged race, he'd never anticipated a brute from the ground vaulting into the sky. Still, training under Ethan had taught him to expect the unexpected, and to act fast. Crossing his arms, he braced himself. Boom! A massive blast rippled outward as Clark slammed an arm shield attack into the monster's charging flank. The force sent the beast skidding back a full meter before it collapsed in a cloud of dust and debris. Clark straightened, heart pounding. He peered down at the fallen monster, barely believing what he'd just done. That was all you had? He thought. The city's protector stood ready, challenge accepted. Ethan had arrived too late to stop the first wave of carnage. In the town square, dozens of citizens lay groaning on the cobblestones, some stunned, some bleeding, after that terrible first blow. He realized, with a sickening clarity, that nobody here had anticipated an attack like this. They must have believed themselves safe, or simply underestimated the threat. Kind-hearted as he was, Ethan never paused to consider how vast the power gap might be between these ordinary people and whatever monstrous force had descended upon them. Then the creature reared back for another strike. Towering over the ruined fountain, it looked almost mythic. Armored hide like black granite, a massive horn jutting from its forehead, human arms ending in oversized fists. The local emergency broadcasts had already nicknamed it Rhinoceros. The code name had caught on fast, too fast, as the beast seemed to revel in its infamy. Ethan launched himself forward. He didn't know if raw courage would be enough, but he couldn't stand by and watch more innocents crushed. His feet touched down just as the rhinoceros's punch slammed into the smashed remains of a market stall. A thunderous shockwave rattled the surrounding buildings, and dust filled the air. In that instant, Ethan caught the giant's fist with both hands, flexing every muscle to hold it at bay. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Phones clicked, cameras rolled, and commentators halfway around the globe shouted in disbelief. "Did you see that? He's actually stopping it! That's not human strength. Call him Superboy." When someone that strong teams up with Superman, it's going to rewrite the record books. The rhinoceros recoiled, horn lowering in furious surprise. It hadn't expected to meet resistance, least of all from a lone young man whose uniform was more painter's smock than battle armor. Ethan planted his feet firmly, lifting the creature's arm and twisting it aside so that its next blow smashed into an empty stretch of pavement. Bricks and dust exploded outward, but none of the townspeople were caught underfoot. He felt every ounce of the monster's power pressing against his bones, but he didn't flinch. A single thought drove him on. I won't let you hurt them again. Gritting his teeth, Ethan threw the rhinoceros off balance with a sudden wrench, sending it stumbling backward. For a heartbeat, the world hung silent. Then came the roar of the crowd as they realized the tide had turned. The rhinoceros, chest heaving, glared at Ethan with burning red eyes. Whatever plan it had brought to this town, it hadn't counted on a hero so determined and so unexpectedly strong to stand in its way. Clark had already sized up the rhinoceros monster's explosive power, and he knew he couldn't leave it unchecked. If he let it roam, it would come after him and devastate everything in its path. Better to deal with it now than go back and see how his people were faring. The beast snorted, sensing danger, but before it could charge, Clark vanished and reappeared in an instant, smashing his fist into the rhino's horn. Boom! The force of the blow sent a shockwave rippling through the creature's skull. It let out a guttural howl, its head spinning, as the earth beneath its feet split open in a widening crater. When the dust settled, the once straight horn dangled at a crooked angle. "A phantom-level monster, and it still can't land a hit," Clark muttered. "Too easy." Ethan watched from a distance, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He'd had a hand in summoning this very rhinoceros, carefully chosen to stretch America's defenses without collapsing them entirely. He knew it was only a matter of time before a foe emerged that even Clark couldn't outmatch. When that day came, the United States would have no choice but to negotiate with him. For now, the rhino was dealt with, but Ethan's lips curled into a faint smile. The real challenge was still to come. Ethan didn't hesitate. While the rhinoceros beast was still staggering, he yanked its horn, heaved it overhead, and launched it skyward. Boom! The creature burst through the sound barrier, a shockwave rippling outward as a faint mock cone trailed above its head. Seizing the moment, Ethan charged his biofield and activated his force shield. In an instant, he rocketed forward at supersonic speed, silent, save for the crackle of his own energy. The monster's ascent faltered, and Ethan slammed into it full force. The collision detonated the creature's remaining mass into a cloud of gore. Bloody fragments rained across the nearby blocks, but the wind scattered them almost as quickly as they fell. Without wasting a second, Ethan dashed toward his companion's position. Amid the rubble, the Patriot struggled to his feet, blood plastered across his brow. Ow! He pressed a hand against the wound as he blinked through one blood-stained eye. "Where's the monster?" he rasped. Ethan reached out, catching him under the shoulder. "It's dealt with. You okay?" The Patriot gave him a crooked nod, wincing as he tested his legs. Ethan braced him for support. In the eerie calm that followed the fight, the two heroes exchanged a brief, determined look, ready for whatever came next. Back in the homeland, people were seething, but with the rhinoceros monster's body in ruins, even though it still clung to a shred of life, there was no one left to punish, and the call for vengeance died away. Reluctantly, they had to let it go. Meanwhile, on the live stream, the chat exploded. "Ethan, he's unstoppable. Wonder Woman doesn't even compare. Look at those muscles. This is the superhero I signed up for. Even Homelander is outclassed. Is it just me, or is this fight way too savage? Ethan is the strongest." Fans cheered the monster's defeat and celebrated that they could finally rest easy. They were profoundly grateful to Ethan and had come to embrace the very idea of a superhero. But in Washington, the mood was icy. America's military-industrial elite, those who'd feared Ethan's unchecked might, sat speechless. If the so-called Superman complex could deploy Ethan at will, with no moral restraints, who could dare stand against them? One thing was certain. From this day on, the rules of America had irrevocably changed. Put simply, the world's rules have changed. From this day forward, it's the era of superhumans. And just like that, everything fell into place. Young Ethan, once nicknamed Little Superman, re-emerged as the brilliant hero Supernova. They dropped Superboy because it sounded too juvenile. Supernova had the perfect ring to it. Meanwhile, Homelander earned universal praise as the fearless champion who never flinched before the most powerful enemies. Chapter 424, Complete Teen Titans, Bang! Homelander slammed the remote control against the television in a single furious motion. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. Yet another network segment fawning over Supernova while portraying him as little more than a circus sideshow. They hailed her fearlessness, how she charged headlong into danger to protect civilians, while gleefully replaying the one embarrassing moment he wanted buried forever. The footage had gone viral. Homelander standing coolly before the rampaging rhino monster, catching its massive fist in midair with an almost casual grace, only to have it slip from his grip and send him sprawling in a humiliating face slap. He'd managed to scrub the clip from his own streaming platform, but every other news outlet in America treated it like front-page gold. Day after day, they dredged up dark history, his moment of weakness, just to stoke ratings. He threw a glare at the blank screen. Of course, a free press could run whatever it liked. But Homelander knew the real reason behind the smear campaign. His godfather had long ago set these gears in motion. As long as the cameras stayed fixated on his stumbles, he'd remain off balance, and that suited someone else's agenda just fine. Homelander took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm the rage that threatened to boil over. Let them chase their headlines. He had his own plan to reclaim the narrative, and they would all be sorry the day he did. Ethan leaped onto the rooftop, the moon, a massive silver disk, hanging low in the sky behind him. He pressed his palms on the cool concrete, eyes shining with anticipation. "Once we finally seize control of this country," he murmured, "my mother will be able to do anything she wants." He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, still buzzing from his latest attack, the Crescent Sky Strike. This wasn't a simple pastime, it was Ethan's only release. Lacking any natural force field and unable to find relief with ordinary women, he'd funneled all his pent-up frustration and twisted desires into perfecting this devastating aerial maneuver. Azu stood a few paces away, watching with quiet fascination. He understood why Ethan had created the Crescent Sky Strike once he discovered that no normal woman could satisfy him. Aside from the inevitable rubble raining down from high altitudes, Ethan's actions remained, on paper, within the law. Still, even Azu had to admit there was something almost cleansing about those brilliant arcs of energy cleaving the night sky. And it was a mercy that Ethan couldn't punch through steel like Superman Hancock. Otherwise, the entire skyline would have been rubble by now. To make sure no one ever traced the damage back to them, Ethan's own descendants and grandchildren had been dispatched throughout the city with thermal vision drones, scrubbing every last hotspot from view. Ethan had been raised for a single purpose, to leave no trace behind, not even a scrap of DNA. By the time he reached adulthood, every record of his existence had been scrubbed clean. "If you want to see a clone of yourself standing against you," he told Homelander with a steely calm, "bring me a sample of your genes." Homelander, confident that no one could extract his DNA without his leave, only smirked. He didn't possess X-ray vision, but his eyesight was unnervingly acute. He could spot the smallest biological signature from half a mile away. Ethan approved. Watching a counterpart circle you, one molded from your very blueprint, was far more entertaining when the quarry thought itself untouchable. With that challenge set, Ethan turned his attention to assembling the world's own gallery of superheroes. His first discovery was the local equivalent of Captain America, not an actor or a government operative, but a celebrated football player whose features mirrored Steve Rogers' almost uncannily. Ethan chuckled to himself. Seems Johnny Storm from the Fantastic Four must be another pro athlete, too. Yet even before he'd tracked down every Fantastic Four analog, the football star's resemblance was too striking to ignore. Within days, he'd arranged to recruit him for the role of America's super soldier. Next on Ethan's list was the analog of Soldier Boy. It didn't take long. After scouring underground fight circuits and old military records, he pinpointed a fallen combat veteran whose profile fit perfectly. Decorated, disillusioned, but hungry for purpose. By the time Ethan stepped back to admire his lineup, Homelander's genetic challenger, the Captain America lookalike, and the real-world Soldier Boy, he was more than satisfied. His new heroes were ready. Now the real experiment could begin. Ethan decided against reshaping the two young heroes' core personalities. They'd already grown into themselves. Instead, he would overwrite their memories outright. Their ages weren't far off from Clark and Homelander's. Had they been any older or younger, Ethan's ill-fated Teen Titans knockoff never would have taken hold. He reworked their origin stories more radically this time. In the earliest days of the Superman Company, the Biological Gene Corporation had confiscated an orphaned boy. Ethan left it ambiguous whether this was the analog of Captain America or Johnny Storm, and raised him under the Gene Corp's watchful eye. When the boy's superpowers finally manifested, he naturally entered the newly reorganized Gene Program, renamed internally as the Biological Gene Company. That boy was Steve, upright, kind, and eerily reminiscent of Clark Kent. From childhood onward, Steve's closest friend was none other than Soldier Boy. Ethan had deliberately excluded Bucky Barnes. Bucky was too predictable, too dour. Soldier Boy, by contrast, was an endless source of chaos. Proud and haughty, he'd boasted upon awakening that he planned to become the most powerful superhero the world had ever seen. Steve never suspected that his friend's ambition masked something far darker. Soldier Boy still treated him with genuine loyalty, and that was enough to blind Steve to any warning signs. Ethan and Steve had both been orphans, rescued and raised by Biogene Corporation before being recruited together into Superman Industries. They'd grown up side by side, inseparable friends. Ethan, now codenamed Soldier Boy, often teased Steve with overly familiar banter, but the young man who'd inherited the title Captain America rarely seemed to notice. Still, Ethan didn't mind playing the eager sidekick just to make Steve smile. A heavy-set woman, one of the department managers, cleared her throat. "All right, Ethan, Soldier Boy, and Steve, Captain America. These are your official superhero identities, approved by the company." Ethan glanced at Steve and grinned. "I'm Soldier Boy and you're Captain America? That sounds a little over the top, don't you think?" Steve shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "Isn't the name Captain America supposed to belong to the first generation of heroes?" he muttered. "It's the boss's decision," the manager replied with a shrug. "He picks every code name himself." She didn't look intimidating, just warm and a bit plump, but Ethan felt oddly protective of her. Even as a teenager, he'd learned plenty about the world's uglier side. Without Superman Industries, he would have been out on the streets, struggling to survive. Boss, he thought with a wry smile. There was nowhere else he'd rather be. Ethan stood silently as Soldier Boy, brutal, unflinching Soldier Boy, nodded in grudging respect. Even someone as hardened as him felt the weight of Ethan's new title. Steve, leaning against the wall nearby, looked equally stunned. Ethan's heart thudded. The boss had dubbed him Captain America. Was this really an acknowledgement of his worth? Soldier Boy cleared his throat. "So, Steve and I are partners, and I'm his deputy?" Ethan frowned. "Deputy?" Soldier Boy shrugged. "Nicknames usually tell you who wears the pants, right? One's the captain, the other's the soldier. I'm fine with it." Ethan bristled. "We're equals, partners, nothing more." Soldier Boy waved a hand dismissively. "Sure, just like Supernova and Homelander. Homelander's her deputy, isn't he?" At that moment, Homelander himself materialized behind them, face ashen with fury. Clark Kent, standing off to the side, shifted uncomfortably and stared at the floor. Neither had meant to eavesdrop, but there they were. Ethan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He'd baited Soldier Boy on purpose, knowing that sooner or later the man's foul mouth would get him into trouble. And if it happened in front of Homelander, so much the better. Ethan stepped forward, just as Soldier Boy finished riling up the crowd, exactly the push they needed to turn public opinion against him and Captain America. How else could the people of the motherland have soured on their heroes so quickly? "Citizens of the motherland," Ethan called out, raising his voice to carry over the murmur of discontent. "Don't let them mislead you. There's nothing to fear here." At his side, Clark, Superboy, nodded in agreement. "That's right." Clark added, "Stay calm." A lone man, wearing the familiar red and gold crest of Homeland Security, pushed through the gathering and cleared his throat loudly. Soldier Boy and Captain America whirled around at the sound. To their shock, standing only yards away, were Homelander and Superboy, the very paragons they'd been taught to admire. Soldier Boy's hand flew up to his nose, as though he'd been caught in a private conversation. Captain America, usually so quick with a quip, found himself speechless. After all, these were his childhood idols. Though they were all teenagers, members of the Teen Titans in fact, the outside world had framed them as the scrappy upstarts opposing the adult powerhouse team, the Fantastic Five. Yet thanks to their own heroics, saving the city on more than one occasion, they'd already achieved a fame comparable to the nation's top scholars meeting the valedictorian. Ethan didn't flinch. He straightened his shoulders, flanked by Homelander's unshakable presence and Superboy's cool confidence. A tense hush fell over the assembled heroes. The stage was set for the confrontation of a lifetime. Captain America and Homelander exchanged glances as they took in the two new arrivals. Could these be the last pieces needed to fill out the Teen Titans' 5-hero roster? Ever since Soldier Boy's disastrous first mission, the original members had been on edge, especially Captain America, who still couldn't shake the odd sense of déjà vu the brash newcomer inspired. A confident young man stepped forward first. He wore a grin as bright as his costume. "I'm Supernova," he announced. "You can call me Superboy, too." The tallest Titan, Steve Rogers, now a blend of super soldier and sorceress power, offered his hand. "Welcome, Supernova. I'm Captain America." When Rogers clasped Clark's hand, it buzzed with a gentle, magical energy, proof that this Captain America was more than mere muscle. He'd been enhanced by arcane forces at the hand of their other new recruit. Before anyone could comment, the second newcomer cleared his throat. He stood a little apart, quiet but steady-eyed. "I'm Ethan," he said. Steve raised an eyebrow. "Ethan? What brings you two here?" They exchanged introductions, and then the team's coordinator, one of the Homeland heroes assigned to guide them, stepped forward with a welcoming smile. "As of today, both of you are official members of the Teen Titans." Clark's eyes lit up. "Really?" At his enthusiasm, Captain America could hardly contain himself. He let out a whoop of excitement. Even Soldier Boy, who'd been lingering at the edge of the clearing, looked genuinely surprised. He definitely hadn't expected the Teen Titans to claim two brand new superheroes on the spot. Yet here they were, 5 strong and ready for action. Ethan leaned forward, enthusiasm sparking in his eyes. "All right, everyone, let's team up. A fresh, high-profile squad is just what we need. Who'd say no to that? But to fight effectively, we need to know each other's abilities. So let's go around and share our powers." Clark was first to speak. He shrugged with a confident grin. "Nothing mysterious here. You all know me. Super strength, flight, near invulnerability. I'm the heavy hitter." "Same here," said the hero known as Motherland, nodding in agreement. Though he was a smaller version of Clark in build, he was equally sure of his capabilities. "I may look compact, but I pack just as much punch." Steve Rogers, Captain America, tilted his head. "And you?" he asked Motherland. "What's your power?" Motherland took a breath. "My superpower is courage." He raised an eyebrow. "Courage?" "Exactly," Motherland explained. "That's the code name Boss gave me. It's drawn from one of the 8 virtues of the Knights, bravery and fearlessness. Whenever I truly embody courage, my strength, speed, and durability spike. The only limits are that I can't fly or project energy blasts." Steve nodded thoughtfully. A slow smile spread across his face. "Bravery's as good a power as any. Welcome aboard." Ethan frowned, still unaware that his ability had an official name, 50-50. No matter who he faced, his own physical strength would automatically match his opponent's, point for point. Naturally, he could still overwhelm anyone weaker than himself, but he could never surpass or fall below the level of the person across from him. "Now that's an interesting power," a Homeland officer remarked, leaning forward. It was the first time anyone in his country had encountered such an ability. Soldier Boy stood up straight and grinned. "As for me, my powers are simple, enhanced physique and a chest-mounted energy cannon." He alone knew just how formidable Captain America truly was. Under ordinary circumstances, he'd be outmatched by Steve Rogers. Yet the moment Cap roared into battle, Soldier Boy's serum surged to an equal level, and then his decades of combat experience gave him the edge. If not for his respect for Captain America, he'd insist Ethan's ability was nothing short of cheating. The Homeland commander cracked a smile. "Talking's one thing. Why don't we see this 50-50 in action?" Soldier Boy cracked a wry smile as he surveyed the enormous combat chamber before him. "A little sparring session? Just a pretext to assert dominance and sort out the pecking order? Fine by him. He trusted his own strength, and Captain America's, to carry the day. If Homelander and Supernova couldn't match them, he wouldn't hesitate to claim leadership of the team. Homelander bristled at the unspoken challenge, while Steve Rogers stiffened, his expression equally guarded. Neither wanted to damage their hard-won friendship, but both were drawn to the thrill of competition. After all, these bouts served as much-needed coordination drills, even if team practice was a bit of a euphemism. Ethan appeared at the chamber's entrance just then, his presence calming the undercurrent of tension. He'd become a trusted ally of both Captain America and Soldier Boy ever since his augmentation, a bond that now felt indispensable. He gave Homelander and Supernova a steady look. "Heard you two are about to square off." Supernova glanced away with a shrug. Homelander merely nodded. Ethan's gaze flicked to Steve and Soldier Boy at the far end of the room. "And you're on their side," he added quietly, but firmly. Before anyone could respond, a member of the Teen Titans hurried forward. "Ethan, you really shouldn't be in here. It's dangerous." Ethan offered a half smile. I'll be fine. You know I can hold my own. As the Titan backed away, the doors sealed shut with a heavy hiss. Bright floodlights illuminated the chamber, revealing reinforced walls and a floor designed to absorb even the mightiest blows. Homelander squared his shoulders, Supernova cracked her knuckles, and Captain America tightened his grip on his shield. Soldier Boy rolled his neck, eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Whenever you're ready," Soldier Boy called, voice echoing through the vaulted room. A taut silence fell. Then, in unison, the four heroes lunged into motion, each determined to prove they were the strongest, the fastest, and the rightful leader of this new era of heroes. "Go on, you should head to the audience chamber." Homelander's face softened into a genuine smile. He'd been worried for Ethan's sake. After all, beneath all the powers and costumes, Ethan was still human. "It's better that way," Homelander added. "If anyone tries anything, they won't catch you unawares." Soldier Boy stiffened at the easy camaraderie between Ethan and Homelander. Ethan, the son of the big boss, greeted them as though they'd grown up together, while Soldy, or Boy, could only stand aside. But what choice did he have? The rest of the team had never judged Ethan for being an orphan, or for the secret of his adopted identity. They'd invited him along on missions, thrown him birthday parties, treated him like one of their own. Even the cold-hearted Soldier Boy had fallen under Ethan's spell. If Ethan had ever asked for a date, Soldier Boy would have jumped at the chance, arranging everything down to the last detail. But Ethan had no taste for flings or late-night liaisons. He wasn't interested in romance or models, so Soldier Boy never got the opportunity. "Have you two met before?" Mother Russia asked, curiosity lighting her eyes. Clark, though he'd always known his brother was the stronger of the two, failed to recognize it now. Chapter 426, A Father-Son Bond Between Soldier Boy and Homelander. "Of course I do," Ethan said, flashing a confident smile. "Humph, not everyone's cut out for greatness like us." Soldier Boy bristled at the slight. "Hey, don't talk nonsense." Captain America stepped between them, worried Soldier Boy might have offended Homelander and Supernova Clark. "It's fine," he said, waving a hand. "He has a point. None of us are as good as I am." Homelander's eyes glittered, and he bared a predatory grin. "All right, then. From now on, we're a team, friends even." Ethan shook his head in mock disbelief. "Friends? Right. See?" Captain America said, adopting an open, earnest stance. "We're teammates and friends." "Exactly," Clark, codename Supernova, added with an easy smile. "Let's test our synergy. We'll need to coordinate perfectly." Ethan chuckled. "Enough chatter. Why don't you two show me how you work together? Start fighting. Give me a taste of your cooperation." Before Captain America or Supernova Clark could even lift a finger, it was Soldier Boy and Homelander who charged in first, trading the opening blows. Ethan peered at the young soldier's weapon, a small, triangular shield embossed with a stylized eagle. "Do you really need that?" he asked, tilting his head. "Why carry a shield at all?" The soldier glanced down, shrugging one shoulder beneath his battered camouflage jacket. "Orders," he replied flatly. "Boss says a shield makes you look less threatening, gives the hostages a little security." Ethan's gaze flicked to the other man beside him, taller, broader, wearing a dark mask emblazoned with a looming star. In his hand was a circular buckler, its surface smeared in red, white, and blue stripes. The design was more intricate than the triangular shield. Concentric rings, a central starburst, every inch covered by that unmistakable stars and stripes motif. "Both of you have shields," Ethan noted, curious despite himself. "Is this, what, some kind of American thing?" Captain America, so the masked man was called, stepped forward, his boots clicking on the concrete floor. "It's about symbol," he said, voice steady and firm. "A shield isn't meant to kill. It stands for protection and justice." He raised his buckler in a crisp salute. "People see this and know we're here to defend, not to slaughter." The younger soldier, nicknamed Soldier Boy, gave a lopsided grin and tapped the edge of his triangular shield. The metal rang with a muted clang, just loud enough to remind you of its strength. Ethan noticed the faint scars along its rim, likely from previous fights. "Besides," Soldier Boy added casually, "if I wanted to carve someone up with this, I could." He flexed his fingers. "But rules are rules." He winked. Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing their words and their symbols. In this strange, war-torn place, the shield really did change everything. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a promise. We protect. And sometimes, in the chaos, a promise was all you could hold on to. Ethan leaned against the railing, catching his breath as Motherland Man drifted down beside him, hands folded behind his back and a wry smile on his face. "Well," he prodded, "aren't you going to fly?" Ethan flashed a mischievous grin. "Why? Seems a little unfair." Motherland Man chuckled and shook his head. "Really? Then you'd better watch yourself." Ethan's grin widened. He loved getting under his rival's skin, and if it threw him off just enough to hesitate, that was all the better. In a straight sprint or a test of raw agility, Motherland Man held the advantage. His ability to leap into the air and cruise at top speed was a gap Ethan simply couldn't close. But in a head-on collision, nothing bounced back like the American's trademark resilience. "Don't let those wings go to your head," Ethan teased. "I might not be able to keep up in the sky, but on the ground, you'll see." Motherland Man laughed, eyes flashing with challenge. Across the compound, Cyclops, the poster boy for this new generation of heroes, watched from the observation deck. His brilliant optic blasts, enhanced vision, and hyper-acute hearing placed him on yet another tier above both men. Still, not even Cyclops could shrug off a brutal training session as easily as Ethan. After their first sparring match, Ethan downed a couple of beers and strolled off for pizzas, while Motherland Man had to spend half an hour hiding purple bruises under Maeve's carefully applied concealer. "Ready for round 2? Ethan called. Cracking open another bottle, Motherland Man hovered in midair, already charging for the rematch. And just like that, the chase was on, two superpowered competitors testing every edge they had. Chapter X, Defense, Ethan versus Homelander. Most heroes quail at the mention of Homelander's optic blasts, but Ethan stands apart. His very flesh is reinforced to absorb Cyclops-level energy, and his shockwave-dampening shield renders explosions and heat vision alike mere annoyances. In defensive prowess, he truly is the king. Even offensively, he holds the edge. His chest-mounted laser cannon outclasses Homelander's beams by a notable margin. Ethan reset their powers to full, 100% on both sides, no artificial buffs or nerfs. He would not grant his fellow superhuman any courtesy. Beneath their clashing egos lay something far more tangled, the twisted remnants of a father-son bond, each blow laden with unspoken grudges. With a single, seismic stride, Ethan closed the distance and drove his fist square into Homelander's jaw. The Golden Hero staggered, pupils shrinking to narrow slits as he tracked Ethan's next move. Then, like the sun being sliced in half, Homelander's eyes flared scarlet and unleashed a roaring heat vision blast. Ethan raised his shield just in time. The sheer intensity of the blast rippled against its surface, scorching but not shattering. He tilted the shield, channeling the searing rays to skim along its edge rather than strike head-on. Plumes of superheated air hissed into the sky as the redirected beam carved a crater where the ground had been moments before. Ethan's breathing stayed steady behind the shield. He knew this was only the beginning. Matching Homelander's raw power would demand every ounce of his unmatched defense. And he was more than ready. Even though Ethan's physique had been supercharged by Vought's experiments, strong enough to chew through rifle bullets, Homelander's heat vision still outmatched any firearm. Ethan barely dodged the searing beam and countered with an uppercut. Homelander simply caught his fist in one massive hand. A blinding flash of displaced energy rippled outward. Stunned, Ethan realized the alien hero had stopped his punch without effort. Homelander didn't hesitate. He swung back with a brutal right hook. Ethan slammed his reinforced shield into place, and the impact rang out like iron on an anvil. Homelander had expected the shield to shatter, but instead he felt the familiar recoil of a blow against unyielding stone, pain screaming through his knuckles. He staggered back, momentarily surprised. After years of facing weapons that failed before they even hit him, a shield this sturdy was hardly something to take lightly. Homelander struck first, his fist darting forward like a bolt of lightning. Soldier Boy met the blow head-on, retaliating with a savage punch that resonated through the air like rolling thunder. Homelander felt the impact jar his bones, and knew immediately he was up against no ordinary thug. Drawing on the relentless combat drills he'd endured at Superhero Corp, he shifted his stance, planted his feet wide, and unleashed a storm of blows. Soldier Boy wilted under the onslaught, shield raised in frantic defense, but the pressure was relentless. With a sudden pivot, he lunged sideways, ramming his shield into Homelander's back. Homelander twisted in midair, seizing the rim of the shield just as it struck. Then, just like hammer against anvil, their fists and boots collided again and again, each crash ringing out like cannon fire. With a roar, Homelander planted both hands against Soldier Boy, sin-coming strike, their combined force sending shockwaves through the ground. For a split second, time seemed to shudder, and then the clash resumed, more ferocious than ever. Both combatants scowled, their eyes sparking like lightning. Every muscle in their bodies stood out under the strain, pulses racing as they circled each other. Their attacks and defenses grew more frenzied with each passing second, fists and feet weaving together in a brutal dance, each strike met with a counter, every block answered by an even harder blow. "Let's see how long you can keep this up," the Soldier Boy taunted through gritted teeth. Homelander just smiled, cold and unhurried. "You're far too overconfident." Chapter 427. Captain America and Superboy Homelander sneered and lashed out, his fist driving into Ethan with a force that made the ground quiver. Yet Ethan didn't flinch. He met the blow head-on and with a sharp cry, swung back. Their fists collided in a thunderous crash that reverberated through the air. Neither combatant would give an inch. Surrounded by friends and fellow heroes, they had descended into a fierce, personal duel, an unforgiving contest neither could afford to lose. For both, this fight would become a black mark on their history if they showed any sign of weakness. It was less a sparring match and more a twisted father and son reckoning, each determined to prove his dominance. In the next instant, they unleashed the full breadth of their power. A shockwave rippled outward as they surged toward each other, bodies moving faster than the eye could follow. Ethan's fists rained down on Homelander like a torrential downpour, each blow threatening to break the sound barrier. But Homelander slipped through the onslaught with inhuman grace. Countering in a heartbeat, he drove his fist into Ethan's shield, the impact sending sparks skittering across its surface. "You really think you can hide behind that rusty old shield?" Homelander taunted, grinning with contempt. "Pathetic." They'd been trading blows so long and so fast it felt like two champion boxers duking it out for 20 brutal minutes. What infuriated Homelander most was that every time he launched a punch, Soldier Boy's blasted shield came down to block it. Without that shield, without his trusty Cyclops, Soldier Boy would have taken much heavier hits. It was maddening. Soldier Boy grinned through the haze of gunpowder smoke. "That shield's my weapon," he taunted. "If you're too proud to use yours, don't blame me for defending myself." They broke apart, circling for position, chests heaving, eyes burning with contempt. Homelander spat the words back at him. "Then keep hiding behind it." With a roar, Homelander lunged forward, fist cutting through the air. His blow slammed into Soldier Boy's cheek, leaving a fiery red welt. Soldier Boy swung his shield in retaliation, thundering it into Homelander's forearm. Homelander twisted away just in time, shot up into the sky, and came down with a devastating kick to Soldier Boy's ribs. Ethan crouched at the edge of the training yard, his eyes never leaving the two combatants. On one side stood Soldier Boy, solid and unflinching. On the other, Homelander, every muscle taut and ready. The moment Homelander launched a high kick, Soldier Boy flowed effortlessly around it and slammed a fist into Homelander's ribs. The crack of bone against bone echoed through the hangar. Homelander countered with a blistering series of hooks and jabs, each blow crackling through the air. But Soldier Boy's forearm shield absorbed every strike, metal ringing like a bell. They traded blows relentlessly, knee strikes to the thighs, savage elbows to the lower abdomen, elbows thrust into the ribs, each attack aimed to cripple. Neither fighter hesitated, neither yielded an inch. Using his speed, Homelander darted in and out, ducking under Soldier Boy's wide arcs and delivering quick, punishing counters. Soldier Boy pressed forward, shield raised, driving Homelander back step by step. Each time Homelander tried to seize an advantage, Soldier Boy met him with iron resistance, a clash of raw power and unbreakable will. Watching from the sidelines, Ethan felt his own pulse quicken. From this angle, it was clear Homelander was on the back foot. He'd mastered countless fighting styles, so many that his mentors once boasted he'd never need another instructor. Yet here he was, struggling to break Soldier Boy's defense. Ethan wondered, with all of Homelander's techniques, did he really need Miss Shiva's guidance after all? Pain lanced through Homelander's side as Soldier Boy's shield crushed into him once more. He swallowed hard, squared his shoulders, and pressed forward again. Soldier Boy met him head-on. Shield braced for impact, fists and metal collided, and Ethan held his breath, knowing there was no turning back now, only the next ruthless exchange. Clark hovered above the fray and called down, "That's enough. Let's step in. They're getting out of hand." Steve Rogers nodded to Clark, but Ethan raised a hand to stop him. "Hold on. Let them settle it themselves." Below, Homelander charged with a roar, his fists slamming into Soldier Boy's shield in a thunderous boom. The older hero merely braced himself and spun, swinging the shield in a wide arc toward Homelander's ribs. Homelander twisted aside and fired back with a brutal kick to Soldier Boy's side. Soldier Boy dropped into a low crouch, caught Homelander's ankle, and yanked hard, toppling him off balance. Seizing the moment, Homelander lunged for Soldier Boy's head, but the veteran rolled away just in time. What followed was a blur of fists and boots, a storm of violence so fierce that each impact sent shockwaves through the air. Soldier Boy's shield roared with every deflection. Homelander's figure flickered in afterimages as he weaved and struck. Both men's faces were twisted in concentration and rage. Soldier Boy threw back his head and laughed, exhilarated. "Is that it? Is that all you've got?" He planted his feet firmly, unshaken, and the battle raged on. Ethan barely had time to brace himself before Homelander struck. He came hurtling down like a bolt of lightning. Ethan dove sideways, but the sheer force of Homelander's punch still rocked him, sending him skidding across the courtyard. He landed hard, dust billowing around him, yet he rolled with the impact, righting himself in an instant. Gritting his teeth, Ethan drew in a steady breath and coiled his strength for a counterattack. He threw a solid punch, and Homelander reacted just in time. His left forearm shot up to block the blow, while his right leg slammed down like a wrecking hammer. Ethan planted his feet and absorbed the strike. Neither man gained the upper hand. They clashed in a stalemate. They launched at each other again. Homelander's assaults came in rapid succession, lightning fast, but Ethan met each one with precise, unbreakable defense. For a tense moment, they circled, trading feints and probing jabs as though in some savage game of cat and mouse. At last, Clark Kent and Captain America had seen enough. The two heroes moved in and yanked them apart before either could land a decisive blow. Even as they were pulled away, both Homelander and Ethan pressed forward, glaring at one another with fiery pride. Homelander scoffed, his disdain clear. "You really think you can block my fist?" Ethan straightened his shoulders, a half-smile twisting his lips. He let out a low, defiant snort. "Can you handle my shield?" Ethan called, his voice carrying across the field. The crowd cheering for the motherland side felt strangely subdued today. If their flyer had taken to the skies, Soldier Boy would have been kited into exhaustion long ago. Instead, they hung back, and someone in the stands jeered, "That shield's more of a burden than a benefit." Soldier Boy threw up his hands. All right, enough talking." For a heartbeat, the battle paused. Neither the Motherland fighter nor Soldier Boy dared press their advantage further. There was no victor yet, and the fans sensed both were holding back. After all, Soldier Boy still hadn't unleashed his fearsome chest cannon, a move notorious for its devastating power. "Now it's our turn," Ethan announced, stepping forward to rally his own side. Captain America flashed Clark a confident grin. "Let's do this." Clark nodded, and the two heroes squared off. Captain America inhaled deeply, summoning every ounce of courage, and felt a rush of strength course through his body. Clark, using his clairvoyant vision, watched with interest as subtle shifts rippled across the captain's muscles and posture. Crackling through their comlink, Clark said, "Ready, Superboy?" "Always," came the reply. In the next instant, Captain America hurled his shield. It whistled through the air, spinning like a lethal frisbee. Clark's eyes widened. He hadn't expected to see a flying shield this sharp or this fast. The battle had just taken a thrilling turn. The disc hurtled toward Ethan, propelled by seemingly magical aerodynamics and the unyielding pull of gravity. Ethan, who'd already witnessed Soldier Boy's brutal showdown with the Seven and knew these shields weren't ordinary, didn't hesitate. He planted his feet, braced himself, and caught the spinning shield with both hands. Chapter 428, Stand Up and Do Sit-Ups. Ethan folded his arms, a self-satisfied grin on his face. Captain America really doesn't stand a chance against Supernova. Despite his rocky relationship with Clark, Ethan was his partner on this mission, and someone had to speak up for Supernova's honor. Soldier Boy snorted. Funny you say that. I'm with you. No one can beat Steve. He wasn't exaggerating. He'd seen the first Avenger at full throttle, an unstoppable force when unrestricted, and even when held back, Steve Rogers always managed to match and then surpass his opponent. Supernova was powerful, but he was still no match for Captain America. We'll see about that, Ethan shot back, eyes narrowed. Soldier Boy practically vibrated with excitement. He couldn't wait to watch Supernova get pinned and humiliated by the man in the Stars and Stripes shield. In the next instant, Clark lunged, seizing for Cap's vibranium disc. But with lightning reflexes, Steve pivoted, closed the gap in a heartbeat, and braced himself for the collision. Ethan felt a surge of power and speed coursing through him. He'd never been more alive. Before he could fully register it, Captain America lunged forward, closing the distance in an instant. With brutal precision, Steve Rogers swung a low side kick at Ethan's ribs. But Ethan's reflexes were even sharper. He ducked beneath the blow, seized Cap's ankle, and slammed him face first into the pavement. Captain America rolled free, springing back to his feet in 2 effortless bounds. He threw his arms wide and let out a thunderous roar that seemed to crack the air. The very atmosphere around them crackled with kinetic energy as he unleashed a relentless flurry of punches. Dozens of blows came at Ethan in rapid succession, each one rattling the world, and yet Ethan felt a new well of strength open inside him. He absorbed the assault like a lightning rod and met every strike with unwavering resolve. Fists and kicks blurred between them, each move executed with flawless technique and breathtaking speed. When Ethan's punch met Captain America's, the impact rang out with a dull clang. They staggered apart, eyes locked, breathing hard. Ethan took the first step forward and drove a fist into Steve's chest. Captain America twisted aside, countering with a straight right that snapped against Ethan's jaw. They crashed together again, 2 forces of nature in a clash that had no clear victor, only the promise of more to come. Ethan and Captain America squared off on the battlefield, each matching the other blow for blow. Their fists became a blur, the thunder of every impact echoing across the smoke-choked ground. Neither man yielded an inch. Their feet shifted constantly, driving in rapid, relentless strikes with unbreakable resolve. It was a deadly dance of power and precision. When Captain America's shield arm swung in, its muscle-bound force slammed into Ethan's jaw with a brutal crack. The shockwave rattled Ethan's skull, but he countered in the same instant, his fist shooting out like a falling star and smashing into Cap's chest plate with such ferocity that it knocked the wind from the super soldier's lungs. Dust and sparks flew as they traded lightning-fast punches and kicks. Ethan's style was raw strength incarnate. Each punch carried the momentum of a battering ram. Each kick struck with merciless power. In contrast, Captain America moved with balletic grace. His strikes might have looked effortless, but the depth of his martial training lay behind every feint and counter. The 2 fighters, one embodying sheer force, the other owned technique, locked in a battle that tested both bodies and wills to their absolute limit. I never would have expected Captain America to be anywhere near the level of a martial arts master. That thought raced through Ethan's mind as he stood on the sidelines. He'd even considered opening a portal back to the Marvel Universe and importing a younger Steve Rogers, one he could mold from the ground up. But watching this world's Steve in action, Ethan promptly abandoned the idea. Clark's fist rocketed forward like a cannonball aimed at Captain America's jaw. In a heartbeat, Steve ducked to the side, whirled around, and snapped out a backhanded palm strike that snapped Clark's head back. Clark's eyes widened in shock as he stumbled 3 steps back, the sheer force of the blow leaving him painfully off balance. Recovering quickly, Clark lashed out with a double leg kick, only to have Steve slip neatly out of range. Without hesitation, they closed the distance again, this time colliding with a deafening crash. In the same instant, Clark latched onto Steve in a bear hug and slammed him against the concrete wall. The impact echoed down the corridor like a gunshot. Captain America shook himself free with a fierce backhand that forced Clark to release his grip. Using the rebound, Steve sprang off the wall and swooped back into the fray like a bat on the hunt. He unleashed a rapid flurry of strikes, each one thrown and retracted in the blink of an eye. Clark met every blow with solid blocks and counters, but with each exchange his astonishment grew. Captain America wasn't just matching him, he was growing stronger, his reflexes sharpening mid-fight, and with every passing second, Steve's speed only seemed to increase. Ethan wrapped his arms around Captain America's neck and tried to slam him to the ground. Captain America slipped free, spun on his heel, and closed the distance in an instant. Ethan scrambled back to his feet and rained down sharp punches and knees, each blow thudding against Cap's shield and armor. Their bodies collided so hard, the floorboards groaned beneath them. Ethan swung a low kick, but Captain America twisted aside and countered with a backhanded palm strike to the base of Ethan's skull. Ethan cried out as raw force drove through his neck, but he stayed upright. His vision hazy, he thrust his other palm forward, and the two massive strikes met in midair with a thunderous crack. The shockwave rattled the walls, spidering fractures through the plaster. Fists and feet flew in a blur, the room reverberating under their onslaught. Ethan feinted with a right hook, drawing Captain America's guard, then snapped out a left kick. Captain America leaned back, narrowly avoiding the blow, but Ethan was already winding up for the next strike, determined to break through his opponent's defenses. Ethan shifted his weight, narrowly evading Captain America's jab as the hero countered with a punch of his own. Ethan twisted aside just in time, and the two fell into a relentless rhythm of attack and defense, each blow met by equal force, neither man gaining the upper hand. Their gloves slapped against taut muscles with dull thuds, steam rising from the effort of their exertion. Ethan's raw strength was formidable, but Captain America's reflexes were razor-sharp. Veins stood out on the shield-bearer's forehead as he braced himself for each impact, muscles coiling like springs. Every punch and every block rang through the training hall, metal lockers rattling, the air crackling with tension. Summoning all his power, Ethan lunged forward, his fist arcing like a released arrow. Captain America pivoted on his heel, meeting Ethan's strike head-on. In the same motion, he twisted Ethan's arm to seize control, only for Ethan to snap his head to the side, drive through with his legs, and hammer his elbow into the captain's side. With barely a heartbeat to spare, Captain America pulled his fist free, the blow grazing him harmlessly. The clash of two titans had escalated to a deafening roar. Their breathing came in ragged gasps as they squared off once more, neither willing to yield, each searching for the decisive opening that would end this fierce stalemate. As the match wore on, their movements grew ever more unpredictable, darting back and forth across the court. Clark's fists and feet came at Captain America in a whirlwind, driving him into a tight corner. But Captain America refused to yield. He found his footing, steadied himself, and delivered a crushing punch to Clark's jaw. With a thunderous crack, Clark went down, hitting the floor hard. Chapter 429, 50-50, then surpass. Ethan didn't stay down for long. He sprang to his feet and delivered a crushing punch squarely to Captain America's chest. There was a sickening crack as the shield-bearer's sternum gave way, but Captain America barely flinched. Eyes blazing with anger and determination, he rose again, unbowed. They closed in on each other once more. This time, Captain America struck first. A lightning-fast straight punch aimed at Ethan's face. Ethan twisted aside and retaliated without hesitation, backhanding Cap hard enough to send him sprawling back to the pavement. But Ethan pressed his advantage relentlessly, raining down a flurry of fists and boots. Each strike landed so quickly and with such force that it seemed there was no end in sight. Captain America, however, proved why he was one of the world's greatest fighters. He ducked and weaved, parrying blows, searching for any opening, even as his uniform bore fresh tears and his body shook with every impact. He refused to back down. Ethan's strikes grew even faster, each blow aimed to break his opponent's guard. Captain America stumbled, fatigue flickering in his eyes, but still he stood firm. Raising his shield eye level, he braced himself against the assault. "That's enough," Captain America growled through gritted teeth. "You're hurt." Ethan's blood pounded in his ears. Pain flared in his knuckles and ribs, but inside him something ignited, an iron resolve to push beyond the 50-50 limit and seize victory. Ethan had never faced such a perfectly matched opponent, apart from his eldest brother, who always steamrolled him so completely it wasn't even fun. But Captain America was different. Steve met him blow for blow, and the visceral thrill of every punch connecting with living flesh was undeniably addictive. Suddenly, Clark drew back, his clairvoyant gaze betraying concern. "Looks like your partner's had enough," he called out. Across the arena, agents from the motherland, gifted with the same power of second sight, nodded in agreement as they watched Steve's wounds deepen. "He won't go down that easily," they urged. "Just wait, he'll surprise you." Soldier Boy, standing nearby, only smiled. To him, Steve's injuries were no barrier. After all, that almost absurd courage superpower he wielded could shrug off far worse. "Don't worry," he said evenly. "I can keep this up all day." Captain America paused, breath coming in measured bursts. He remembered what it had felt like to be bullied when he was weak, and how he'd never once backed down. Now that he'd grown stronger, why should he start now? Planting his feet firmly, he squared his shoulders and met Ethan's glare. As Steve spoke the words, Ethan felt as if he were staring straight into the man's soul, the very soul he'd engineered this confrontation to test. Fate could be a strange thing, Ethan thought, and right now, he was more intrigued than ever. Ethan stared in disbelief as the last of his wounds sealed themselves. Had Captain America really just healed him with a few words? This is cheating, he thought, trying and failing to hide his awe. No sooner had the thought crossed his mind than Captain America closed the distance. Their blows collided in a thunderous clash of fists and kicks, each move tracing brilliant arcs through the air. Ethan leapt, throwing a straight right that slipped past Cap's guard. In one fluid motion, he spun and drove his heel into the hero's midsection. Captain America barely blinked. He stepped forward, grabbed Ethan by the chest, and hoisted him high before slamming him down. Ethan's back thundered onto the pavement, sending a cloud of dust and shattered concrete into the air. Around them, the fight's intensity rocked nearby buildings. Crumbling walls and tumbling debris turned the streets into a battlefield ruin. It was a spectacle of raw power. Only these two could turn a city block into a war zone and walk away unscathed. Ethan pushed himself to his feet, wincing at the pain. He'd proved he could keep up, but he wasn't on Cap's level yet. Captain America's strength and skill were simply on another plane, and Ethan knew he still had a long way to go before he could match that kind of force. Clark and Captain America vanished in a blink, one moment high above the ground, the next planted firmly on concrete. Of course, Captain America couldn't actually fly. He was simply leaping with superhuman strength and precision. Clark swung a haymaker at him, and Cap dropped low to evade, riposting with a rapid-fire series of kicks. Clark blocked the first few, but couldn't hold the line. Captain America's leg snapped into his rib with bone-jarring force. Clark staggered back, grimacing. Tapping into his super speed, Clark blurred forward, only to hesitate, his powers momentarily out of sync. That split-second lag was all Captain America needed. Suddenly, Clark reappeared at his side, fist cocked. He drove a powerful blow into Cap's chest. The impact sent Captain America skidding across the asphalt, but he rolled to his feet in one fluid motion. He pivoted sharply, raised his fist, and launched a counterpunch. Clark ducked under the blow and retaliated with a vicious kick to Captain America's lower back. The force of it toppled him forward, but this was no ordinary fighter. Captain America flipped over, landed on his feet, and charged Clark again without missing a beat. The two combatants clashed in the middle of the street, each strike echoing off nearby buildings as their duel raged on. The two men traded blows so rapidly that each move and countermove was barely perceptible. Fists, kicks, elbows, and knees struck in relentless succession. Clark ducked beneath a wild punch and drove an elbow squarely into Captain America's temple. Steve reeled, staggered backward, then crumpled to the ground with a heavy thud that reverberated across the courtyard. Even the steadiest veteran hesitated. "Steve," someone cried out. But Captain America refused to stay down. With a grim expression, he shook off the haze, rolled to his feet, and readied himself for Clark's onslaught. Grasping his iconic shield, he intercepted a flurry of punches and turned to dodge a lethal knee strike. Seizing the opening, he slammed the shield into Clark's chest with a thunderous crack. Clark hit the ground hard, but he sprang up almost at once. Charging forward with inhuman speed, he rammed into Captain America, driving him back. Again and again, Steve rose, bloodied but unbowed, his unwavering determination shining through every wound. Ethan was already gasping for breath. He just sent Captain America sprawling, but the hero sprang back to his feet as if nothing had happened. An unyielding tumbler, a cockroach you just couldn't crush. Ethan couldn't help but admire his opponent's sheer determination. Drawing on his remaining strength, Ethan unleashed a brutal flurry of blows, his fists raining down like thunder. Captain America refused to give ground. He countered with a precise strike to Ethan's jaw, but Ethan twisted aside, pivoted, and drove a solid punch into the hero's back. Staggered by the impact, Captain America tried to retaliate, only to find Ethan suddenly behind him. Seizing the advantage, Ethan clamped his hand on the back of Captain America's collar, hoisted him up, and hurled him backward. Captain America described a perfect arc through the air before slamming onto the hard pavement. "Carry on," Ethan panted, bracing himself. Almost immediately, Captain America rolled to his feet. But now his speed and power had only grown stronger. Chapter 430, "Are you kidding me?" Clark muttered in disbelief. Before him, Captain America rose to his feet once more, every inch the indomitable warrior. The moment Steve Rogers let out that rallying cry, it was as if a miracle had occurred. He stood taller, fiercer, more unbreakable than ever. This is almost as outrageous as Ethan, Clark thought, recalling his eldest brother's stubborn resolve. He'd never witnessed such sheer mental fortitude. Ethan had it in spades, but Steve's courage went even further. It demanded absolute conviction, unwavering bravery, and a fearless heart. Only by embracing fear and defeat could one grow stronger with each battle, eventually overwhelming any opponent. "Good job, Steve. That's it. Keep him down," Soldier Boy shouted, pumping his fist in the air. The onlookers from the motherland sneered at Soldier Boy's enthusiasm, finding him insufferably brash. Yet beneath their disdain lurked a growing anxiety. No matter how many times they struck Captain America down, he sprang back up, stronger, more determined, and utterly relentless. In that moment, they realized a grim truth. They might not have the power to defeat the man known simply as Captain America. Captain America and Clark squared off, each strike crackling like lightning as their fists and feet collided. Even the other Patriots and Soldier Boys standing nearby could only watch in awe. None could track the rapid blows, only hear the muffled thuds echoing through the air. A sudden gust of wind swept across the battlefield, lashing at both fighters and forcing them backward several steps. The fight had reached a point beyond outside interference. With precision born of endless training, Captain America snapped his leg forward and kicked Clark in the knee. Clark staggered, pain shooting through him, but he refused to yield. Gathering himself, he sprang upward and drove his elbow into Captain America's ribs. The impact made the super soldier grunt, but he managed to angle his shield arm just in time. A burst of energy rippled from the shield, slamming into Clark's shoulder and sending him skidding backward. Neither man paused. They charged, blades glinting as knives rose and fell in a blur. Captain America unleashed a series of hammer fists. Clark countered with low, sweeping kicks that threatened to unbalance his opponent. Each exchange shook the ground, and the wind howled through the clearing like a living thing. Clark swung a vicious right hook that caught Captain America's jaw with a sharp crack. Rather than stagger, Captain America pressed forward, catching Clark's fist on his forearm. In that same fluid motion, he twisted his shield upright, its edge gleaming like a razor, and thrust it toward Clark's neck. Time seemed to slow for a heartbeat as the metallic light of the shield raced forward. Clark's eyes widened, but before he could react, Captain America's shield sliced so close that sparks flew, and Clark was forced to pivot hard to avoid the razor-sharp edge. The two combatants paused for just a moment, chests heaving, each recognizing the other's unyielding resolve. The battle was far from over, and neither man would back down. Clark twisted aside in a heartbeat and delivered a backhand so powerful the air snapped and cracked, but Captain America met it without faltering. As Clark unleashed a relentless barrage, Fists, elbows, knees, even kicks, the space around them seemed to tear under the onslaught. Clark's physique was like solid rock. He channeled an invisible force into his next punch, slamming it into Captain America's chest. In response, the hero ducked low and drove a boot into Clark's midsection. Clark rose his elbow just in time, but the impact still shoved him backward. In that instant, Clark understood. Since their last clash, Captain America's powers had surged beyond even his own. The super soldier formula had pushed Cap's strength, speed, and endurance to new heights, but with every uplift came an immense burden on his mind. Like a pilot enduring crushing G-forces, Cap's will struggled under unrelenting pressure. His combat prowess remained undiminished, but if his resolve wavered even for a moment, all that power would pour out of him like air from a punctured balloon. If his body could stretch and swell like an overinflated balloon without ever bursting, then how had Ethan granted him superpowers with no side effects or hidden costs? It hardly seemed fair to everyone else. And, truth be told, Captain America's abilities had already strayed from his classic comic book roots. Ethan had deliberately avoided turning him into a sword-wielding idealist. After all, that would make him Captain Earth, not Captain America. Clark couldn't shake Ethan's parting words. My specialty is taking on opponents stronger than me and finding a way to fight back. Now, facing Captain America, Clark felt a smirk tug at his lips. The intensity here was nothing compared to what he'd experienced under Ethan's fist. One casual punch from Ethan had sent him to his knees, begging for mercy. So when Captain America shifted into his next move, Clark's fighting style snapped from offense to defense in an instant. His reflexes were too fast. Before Cap could adjust his guard, Clark closed the distance, coiled his body, and drove an uppercut, his version of the Dragon Fist, straight into the hero's chin. Captain America sailed off his feet and slammed into the ceiling. Stars danced behind his eyes as a voice rang out. The victor is decided. Now we're entering Clark's specialty. Ethan shook his head. He knew that as long as Clark stayed at full strength, defeat was impossible. Captain America had simply reached his limit. Sure enough, Clark pounced on his chance, striking with surgical precision and sending Cap sprawling. When the dust settled, Captain America dusted himself off and offered a wry salute. You're not just stronger and faster, you've got a superior sense for the fight itself. Supernova, I'll need your guidance from here on out. Clark's grin was as bright as ever. Trust me, I've been on the losing end a lot more than you have. Their easy laughter rang out like sunlight, only emphasizing the cold calculation on the two men watching them, faces twisted with envy and duplicity. But Clark and Ethan didn't even notice. Homelander, furious at Cap's defeat, stepped forward next. He'd built his reputation by crushing weaker opponents, and he expected another walkover. Instead, Captain America met him blow for blow, deflecting every arrogant strike until Homelander was driven back, forced to admit he'd met his match. Even among monsters and supercriminals, few could rival Captain America, so it was natural that Homelander struggled to gain any real edge against him. Captain America, by contrast, was a different breed of hero. Routinely stronger than ordinary defenders and roughly on par with Soldier Boy, he'd also weathered his own setbacks and learned from them. It wasn't long before he closed the gap on Homelander and defeated him outright. No need to wait until he'd fully outclassed the world's mightiest hero. Homelander, for his part, remained unconvinced, dismissing the loss on the grounds that he'd never even taken flight, a bit of bluster only he took to heart. Then came the announcement that electrified the entire superhuman community. The Teen Titans had recruited 2 new members, Soldier Boy and Captain America. The news broke first on Ethan's family-owned network, but it wasn't long before every media outlet scrambled for its own scoop. Viewers, it seemed, had grown tired of political scandals and celebrity gossip. Now their every waking hour was consumed by superhumans. Reporters chased capes and powers with insatiable curiosity, and some die-hard fans even offered enormous sums to the Superhuman Corporation just for the chance to dine with Supernova or Homelander. It looks like the full chapter text wasn't included. Could you please paste the entire excerpt you'd like me to revise? Once I have the complete text, I'll rewrite it into clear, idiomatic English, rename Luther to Ethan, and ensure he's consistently portrayed as male. Chapter 431. Little Bat and Lex Ethan perched on the edge of Lex Luthor's sleek conference table, the night skyline of Metropolis glittering behind him. Lex leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers as he spoke. "What you just heard about Diana isn't even the ceiling," he said. "Wonder Woman commands prices no one else can touch. A single dinner with her, $50 million. And that's just dinner. If someone wants more, no one's ever been brave or foolish enough to quote a figure." Ethan frowned. "Why would someone pay that much for a meal?" "Because Diana isn't just any superhuman," Lex replied. "She's become the symbol of a new era, the strongest woman on the planet. Every power broker, every spoiled heir, every elitist with deep pockets dreams of winning her favor. They used to think they'd seen and owned everything life could offer, until they realized there was one thing beyond their reach: true superhumans." He paused, letting his words sink in. From the moment they learned to read, these elites were taught that superhumans would rule tomorrow's world. They were told that raw power, fists, strength, advanced weaponry, is the only real currency. Everything else, money, titles, pedigree, is worthless against someone who can bend steel or fly faster than a bullet. Only power is sovereign. The empire belongs to whoever commands the strongest forces. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "So if you can't become one of them, the next best move is to ally yourself with them." Lex nodded. "Precisely. And that, Little Bat," he emphasized the nickname with a small, knowing smile, "is the key to surviving in this city. You either rise by your own superhuman might, or you survive by making yourself indispensable to those who have it." Ethan absorbed the lesson in silence, the weight of Lex's words settling over him like the darkness outside. In a world where power was everything, friendship and alliances had become the greatest form of currency. Ethan stared at the notification on his holoscreen and couldn't believe his eyes. Little Bat had applied to join the Superman Company as an official Gotham City superhero. He replayed what he knew about this mysterious vigilante. The Little Bat hadn't toured the globe like most aspiring heroes, and from all reports, he'd already tangled with the Knight of Light and lost. Worse, the sudden explosion of superhumans in Gotham had thrown him off course. Yet Ethan was convinced that, at heart, the Little Bat still wanted to save this city. His mistake was in lumping every powered individual into one shady category, people to watch closely, instead of studying them more carefully. Ethan himself kept meticulous files on every hero profile the Superman Company had released, their abilities, battle records, public statements. But he'd realized that raw data wasn't enough. To truly understand these superhumans and to plan for every contingency, he needed to probe their personalities, their weaknesses, even their hidden fears. That insight had driven him to scrap his old plan of training under a recluse ninja master. Instead, he'd turned his scholarship into a full-fledged superhero curriculum, blending martial arts, psychology, counterintelligence, and, when possible, a dash of gadgeteering. Still, even with his relentless preparation, Ethan knew how the company ranked its recruits. Without an actual superpower, he'd be lucky to land at 12th tier status, barely a footnote among Gotham's costumed saviors. Unless he could invent something revolutionary, some iron bone, style exoskeleton or energy amplifier like the Fantastic Five had perfected, he'd remain little more than a glorified street cop. And yet, the Little Bat's application proved one thing. Gotham's myths were shifting. If a raw, untested vigilante could step forward and challenge the very foundation of the Superman Company, then maybe there was room for someone like Ethan too. He tapped a few commands, flagged the Little Bat's file for priority analysis, and closed his eyes. It was time to turn theory into action. Gotham might not know it yet, but its next hero was already preparing to emerge. Chapter 7. A Calculated Move. Ethan leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he watched the rooftop feed flicker to life. "You know," he murmured, "it's been ages since I last goaded the Little Bat. Tsk, tsk, Lex Luthor, this man who isn't even truly bald wants to join the Superman Corps. Naturally, he thinks he can seize control of them and become mankind's undisputed ruler." He surveyed the ever-growing roster of the Corps. Metahumans, monsters, even demons, all under one banner. Lex's toxic brand of human supremacism was no secret. He was convinced that only he could guide humanity's next evolutionary leap. With a mind matched only by the likes of Reed Richards, Luthor had engineered breakthrough technologies for every non-human being he encountered. Yet his brilliance had curdled into pseudoscience and empty promises, a charlatan's game. Still, Ethan found himself unable to outright refuse Luthor's application. There was something else at play, an even more devious plan of his own. Once Lex and the Bat crossed paths with Supernova, the youngster everyone called Little Superman, Ethan would trigger his secret device and transform them all into young women. The blushes, the chaos, the unintended romances, it would be glorious theater. He only hoped that Afu, loyal guardian of the real Superman, wouldn't suffer a heart attack at the first sight of his charge in a frilly dress. Leaning forward, Ethan let a self-satisfied grin curl at the corners of his mouth. Let Lex think he'd wormed his way into the core. Tonight, the real show was just beginning. Ethan, known on the streets as the Bat, had fully expected Superman's team to turn him away. He had no superpowers and no cutting-edge gadgets. Yet, to his astonishment, the Man of Steel accepted him on one simple premise: Ethan's unwavering sense of justice. The catch? He'd be managed by a third-rate publicity outfit rather than getting any tactical or technological support. As a result, he's been slotted in at the very bottom of the hero roster. Brand new, untested, and without any real reputation beyond the whispers of Gotham's alleyways, Ethan finds himself pitted against low-level criminals, muggers, purse snatchers, carjackers, the kind of street crime that barely merits a footnote in the evening news. Meanwhile, Lex Luthor, armed with a self-designed suit of armor, already commands far more attention. By comparison, Ethan feels like an afterthought. What stops being funny only when it's in his hands is the promotional package the publicity team has prepared. Novels, action figures, and, most baffling of all, a full comic series starring the Bat. In this official narrative, he's not just a rookie hero, but the protege of Black Bat, one of the legendary Fantastic Five. According to the editors, this tie-in will launch his career. They claim he bears an uncanny resemblance to Black Bat and must be her #1 fan. Ethan can't decide whether he's more embarrassed or exasperated, but at least he's finally got a story out there. Chapter X. All the rights to the world's superheroes were locked up in Superman Corporation's vault. From every comic book sale to every action figure, they claimed a 30% cut. Even creators who managed to negotiate the lifeline minimum of 20% still ceded the lion's share of their earnings. In an industry hungry for superhero IP, Superman Corporation's terms were harsh, but unavoidable. Kid Bat had barely noticed when Ethan steered him into signing that exploitative contract. Bruce bristled at every one of its clauses, yet he lacked the clout to push back. Lex Luthor, by contrast, simply wrote a check for $100 million, and in return, earned full creative control. Now he alone decided which stories went into print, who appeared on the animated series, and which spin-offs hit the video game market. At 14, Lex was already a household name among middle schoolers. Gone were the days he spent hidden in his father's mansion. Now his face was on every magazine cover and every comic book arc, cast him leading a squad of superheroes against alien invaders, supervillains, and rogue metahumans. He'd never had this kind of spotlight before, and he thrived in it. His father, a classic capitalist and market speculator, had recognized early the gold mine in superhuman franchises. He toyed with the idea of funding his own team of powered individuals, and even poured money into research to trigger metahuman abilities, but the science wasn't there yet. Instead, he invested in Superman Corporation, treating each hero as though they were a subsidiary in his own holding company, high-profile assets with relatively contained risk. Ethan watched all of this from the sidelines, fully aware of how the game was played. He'd learned the corporate playbook better than anyone, and he intended to use it to his own advantage. Training costs were virtually non-existent. The young Bat was nominally wealthy, but that fortune came from Bruce, not from his own pocket, and Bruce certainly had no interest in dropping $100 million to twist Superman Corp's storyline. Yet the Bat's powered exosuit caught on almost overnight, and his high-tech vigilante persona was cemented after he single-handedly took down a crazed attacker on the street. Seeing their promise, Ethan added both the Bat and Lex to the Teen Titans roster under the pretense of youthful recruits. That brings the team to a full 6 members, 2 tech-based heroes alongside 4 metahumans. Ethan might tweak the lineup later, but for now, 6 is the limit. He can't wait to see what kind of sparks will fly between these very different heroes. His only regret is that he couldn't find a circus-style clown for contrast. The countless origin stories out there made any one candidate hard to pin down. Otherwise, he'd have loved to slot in the Joker. After all, the Clown Prince of Crime hails from a parallel universe. Chapter 432, Heightened Vigilance. Ethan had never pretended his reasons for joining Superman Inc. were noble. He'd embedded himself in the Teen Titans on a very particular mission, and watching Batman settle in with his new allies confirmed he'd chosen his moment perfectly. The boy beneath the cowl believed he'd found the perfect team, and that he was the lucky one. What he didn't know was just how many hard lessons lay ahead, and Ethan was more than willing to administer a few of those lessons from the shadows. Over weeks of covert observation, Ethan cataloged each Titan's strengths and their weaknesses. 4 gifted superhumans, all of them unpredictable. Even heroes could go off the rails, and Batman knew better than to drop his guard. He'd seen the devastation a single unhinged superhuman could wreak. Entire city blocks laid waste before legitimate heroes could intervene. If those monsters posed such a threat, what would happen if a hero even more powerful snapped? The potential for catastrophe was unthinkable. In Batman's private files, Homelander and Soldier Boy had long since graduated from persons of interest to highest priority surveillance. Their explosive personalities and immense power meant they could never be ignored. And while the Dark Knight kept a vigilant eye on every emerging danger, it was Ethan who would ensure no threat, no matter how well disguised, ever caught him off balance again. Ethan wasn't yet the world's greatest detective, at least not in this grim future, but he was making up for lost time. He spent almost every waking hour refining his skills, testing prototype artificial muscle suits in the lab, mastering hand-to-hand combat in the training room, poring over case files and forensic reports, and delving into cryptography, hacking, and advanced surveillance techniques. Without Bruce Wayne's time-consuming Playboy routine to maintain, Ethan devoted nearly 20 hours a day to this regimen, leaving only a few hours for meals and sleep. It was a pace worthy of Batman himself, one that few ordinary people could endure. But brute strength and gadgets weren't enough. Ethan had supplemented his physical training with deep studies in psychology and personality profiling, and it had paid off. He'd identified the one member of the Teen Titans most likely to snap under pressure. This Titan thrived on applause and adulation, built his entire identity on vanity, and was a master at assuming local disguises wherever the team went. All it would take was a single public embarrassment, a rumor, a leaked secret, a momentary slip in front of the cameras, and his fragile ego would shatter. The darker realization was this. Desperate to protect his carefully crafted image, the Titan might cross the line into murder. Given his formidable powers, a breakdown on that scale would be catastrophic. Ethan understood that preemptive measures were essential. He needed a detailed contingency plan, one capable of containing or neutralizing a teammate gone rogue long before the next time the Titans faced the public eye. Only then could he ensure that one moment of pride wouldn't become a tragedy. Ethan's biggest concern was Soldier Boy, a hero with zero moral compass. It stunned him that someone without any ethical boundaries could be celebrated as a superhero. Superman Company had a serious problem. At least Homelander cared, however superficially, about image and public opinion. Soldier Boy didn't even bother. His only loyalty was to Captain America. Ethan suspected that if Steve Rogers hadn't become a hero, Soldier Boy would have ended up a supervillain instead. With no scruples to hold him back, he'd stop at nothing to achieve his goals, regardless of casualties or collateral damage. That made him infinitely more dangerous than any ordinary supercriminal. Ethan leaned closer to his screen, reviewing the figures and profiles he'd uploaded. Neither Soldier Boy nor Homelander hid their powers. Superman Company's PR machine proudly broadcast their every feat. Both operatives were nearly flawless power templates, except Onal strength, speed, durability, and Homelander even had the added menace of flight. Tracking him in 3 dimensions would be a nightmare. "This is a massive threat," Ethan muttered. We need to stay on high alert. But as he pored over the data, he knew words alone wouldn't be enough. Planning for these two would require every resource and contingency they had, and then some. Compared to Homelander and Soldier Boy, Supernova and Captain America actually inspire more trust. Ethan finds nothing sinister in their characters. After all, he isn't yet the hard, merciless man he's destined to become. For now, he holds Supernova and Captain America in high regard. In Ethan's mind, these two heroes can help keep Homelander and Soldier Boy in check, and even serve as a safeguard against the Fantastic Five, should they ever lose control. Though he's often dismissed as just another fan of the Black Bat, Ethan's motives aren't fueled by grudges, but by a genuine desire for world peace and public safety. He's already commissioned prototypes of both an anti-Homelander suit and an anti-Soldier Boy suit. And thanks to the artificial muscle technology he shared, Lex Luthor has begun developing similar countermeasures of his own. Ethan tapped his stylus against the design pad, eyes glinting with ambition. "Artificial muscle isn't hard to work with," he murmured. The technology's entry barrier was low, and unlike bulky exoskeleton armor, of which no genuine combat-grade models existed, only labor-assist prototypes, artificial muscle already delivered real, responsive power. Still, turning raw research into a battlefield-ready suit wasn't trivial. Few teams possessed the expertise to do it. Then came Batman's breakthrough. Using advanced black tech materials, he'd built a fully integrated artificial muscle combat suit. Ethan studied every publicly available spec, then laid out his own radical plan. Why choose between exoskeleton and artificial muscle when you could fuse them? By weaving super-strong actuators into a rigid support frame, he believed he could achieve far greater strength and speed than either approach alone. With that hybrid armor, he'd have enough force to outpunch Batman and enough agility to evade the Teen Titans. Meanwhile, Gotham's high-tech champions were busy watching each other. Batman suspected the Titans of sabotaging his new suit. The Titans worried their old rival was gearing up for something big. They barely noticed Los Angeles sliding toward a crisis of its own. A monstrous creature, classified at A level on the danger scale maintained by Superman Inc., had emerged from the coastline and was rampaging inland. In Superman Inc.'s hierarchy of threats, general security was the lowest tier, yet even those low-level incidents carried real risk of casualties. Now, with the monster headed straight for downtown LA, the city's defenders would soon learn whether their high-tech toys could stand against a threat this colossal. In this so-called free America, every day can be a fight for survival. Threats are ranked on a scale from D up to S. There are no nations in the One Punch Man world, only more than 20 major cities, so the classifications go like this. D-level dangers can kill individual people. C-level dangers can inflict mass casualties. B-level dangers can cripple an entire city. A-level dangers can destroy one city, or even multiple cities. S-level dangers pose a threat to an entire country. Each rank can also be given plus signs for added severity, D+, D++, and so on. But no matter how many pluses you tack on, the threat never exceeds the upper limit of its base rank. Only the Teen Titans and the Fantastic Five are authorized to handle A-level emergencies, and with the Fantastic Five tied up elsewhere, it fell to the Titans to confront their latest assignment, an A-plus ranked monster capable of obliterating Los Angeles and devastating several nearby cities. Ever vigilant for every scrap of intelligence, Robin pored over the files supplied by the Superman Corporation. Then, without fanfaring, he brought one of his private satellites online to keep a constant watch over the unfolding crisis in Los Angeles. Then Ethan tracked his mark to Los Angeles, but the opponent turned out to be far too formidable. Chapter 433, The Great Villain Emerges. Night had fallen over Los Angeles when the city's stillness shattered. A colossal creature, its bulk as vast as a mountain, loomed on the skyline, every inch of its skin rippling with raw, terrifying power. Its eyes burned like twin furnaces of red flame, seeming to pierce through every illusion and deceit in its path. Mere mortals dared not meet its gaze. With each thunderous swing of its massive arms, violent winds howled across the streets. Steel and concrete shredded like paper under its blows. Cars flew through the air like toys. Its roar rolled over the city like a rolling storm, rattling windows for miles and sending panicked crowds scattering in all directions. This abomination rampaged through downtown Los Angeles as if it were its own private playground, toppling skyscrapers with a single swipe and cracking highways beneath its feet. Bridges buckled under its weight, and the roads split open in deep fractures. Nothing could withstand its might, or so it seemed. Flames erupted along shattered thoroughfares, sending choking smoke spiraling into the night sky. Debris rained down on terrified citizens who fled in every direction, their screams echoing off ruined facades. In minutes, the proud city had become a landscape of fire and ruin. Amid the chaos, one thought pulsed through the hearts of all who watched in horror. What force could stand against this living juggernaut? As the inferno raged and the monster's unrelenting assault continued, Los Angeles faced a nightmare that threatened to consume it entirely, and only time would tell if salvation could ever arrive. No matter where the terrified survivors fled, the creature pursued them with uncanny precision, spreading its reign of terror across the entire city. In the face of this nightmare, even Los Angeles's police and military forces proved helpless. Bullets glanced off its hide like water droplets on steel. It was tougher than any armor, impervious to every shell, missile, and explosive they could muster. From the skies to the boulevards, nothing could slow its onslaught. A general's voice crackled over the radio. "We can't just stand by and watch. You heard me. Los Angeles has officially fallen." But then, against all hope, a roar rose from the crowd. "Look, up there! It's the Teen Titans!" Moments later, the refugees' cheers turned into gasps of astonishment as 5 figures descended from the clouds. First came Little Bat, plummeting without a parachute. His state-of-the-art artificial muscle suit absorbed the shock of the fall. The only evidence of his arrival was the enormous crater he left behind. Next, Lex ignited the jets built into his exoskeleton armor, rocketing skyward and slowing only at the last second to glide gracefully to the ground. Captain America, ever the pragmatist, deployed his parachute and touched down in a perfect, controlled landing. Close behind him, Soldier Boy barrel rolled through the air and slammed down with enough force to crack pavement. And finally, Homelander swooped in for the classic superhero pose, one fist on the earth, cape fanning out behind him like triumphant wings. Their arrival was electric. Dust and debris spun around them, and for the first time since the attack began, the city dared to hope. The Teen Titans had come to fight. Ethan didn't touch down. Instead, he shot straight up to draw the creature's attention. "We need to lure it away from the crowd," he called out. Clark didn't hesitate. Always eager to protect civilians, he charged forward, knuckles glowing with anticipation. He'd rather feel the impact of a punch than scorch a face with heat vision. To his surprise, the monster didn't play by any rules Clark knew. As soon as Clark's fist swung through the air, the beast vanished and reappeared next to the young vigilante in the bat costume. Despite its hulking size, the creature moved with startling speed. In a blur, it contracted until its mountain-sized frame was only 2 or 3 meters tall, still enormous, but far more agile. Before the bat vigilante could CT, the creature's massive hand swept him aside like a rag doll. Had it not been for the reinforced muscle suit, the kid would have ended up in pieces. Seeing his ally in jeopardy, Lex activated his armor's weapon systems. Ordinary firearms wouldn't do against superpowered threats, so his suit housed an array of heavy ordnance, tracking heat-seeking rockets, high-explosive warheads, concussion charges. He unleashed everything, each round streaking toward the monster with deadly precision. Ethan studied the cratered ground with a frown. The infrared-seeking bombs he'd just launched still didn't have the power or velocity he wanted. He made a mental note to refine his warheads for greater destructive force. For now, though, these heat-seeking explosives would have to do. At least in theory they would. But he'd overlooked one critical detail. His opponents included 2 supersonic heroes. Without warning, Clark bent low and darted around the first missile in the blink of an eye. He reappeared behind the hulking stranger Ethan was trying to trap, as if he'd teleported, and before the man could even register what was happening, Clark seized him by the collar and hurled him directly into the path of Ethan's next salvo. Boom, 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 boom. 4 concussions rattled the air in rapid succession. Clouds of dust and smoke billowed skyward, and Ethan seized the moment to strike. Ruby-red beams flared from Superman's eyes as he blasted the heart of the explosion. his heat vision slicing through debris toward the spot where the giant had been standing, but the target had already been blasted clear by the bomb's shockwave. The vision scorched nothing but scorched concrete. At the fringes of the blast zone, Soldier Boy was still locking in his chest cannon charge, no matter every second stretching out like a man desperately trying to focus on a simple task. Recognizing the danger, Captain America sprinted forward, shield raised, and interposed himself between the enemy and his teammate, buying those precious extra beats of time Soldier Boy needed to finish charging. Ethan's heat vision sputtered and died on his lips. Confused, he blinked, but he didn't stop firing. Beams of scorching light continued to lance toward the speedster they were facing. Unfortunately, the stranger's super speed was almost impossible to track. He blurred in and out of sight faster than Ethan could adjust. Only Clark could keep up. Clark darted after the intruder like a living shadow, phasing in and out of view. Ethan watched him vanish, then reappear yards away, still firing. Nearby, Soldier Boy stiffened, his chest cannon glowing ominously. But every time he tried to lock onto the target, the speedster was already gone. Supernova, Captain America barked. Clark froze mid-stride and glanced back as something clicked in his mind. Without a word, he shifted tactics, stalking the speedster like a predator, forcing him into a tighter space. When the foe reappeared directly in front of Clark, the Man of Steel reached out, grasped him by the collar, and hurled him toward Soldier Boy. Because they'd fought together before, Soldier Boy and Clark had formed an unspoken rhythm. The moment the stranger collided with Soldier Boy's chest, a blinding beam erupted from his cannon. The weirdo shrieked as scorching energy slammed into him, pinning him against the asphalt. But that blast alone wouldn't finish the job. Seizing the opening, Clark rocked back and launched a single powerhouse punch, driving his fist clean through the speedster's chest. The creature's cry cut off in an instant, and it slumped to the ground in a lifeless heap. Ethan lowered his arms and wiped sweat from his brow. The field was quiet now, save for the heavy breathing of heroic figures standing victorious. Their combined might had held the line. Today, at least, they had won. Ethan met Soldier Boy's chest cannon blast head-on. He knew his earlier punch had barely phased the hulking creature, so when the beast staggered, Ethan seized the chance. He thrust his hand into its gaping chest cavity and wrenched out flesh and sinew. The monster roared one final time and collapsed, even as Soldier Boy's cannon continued to tear into its exposed innards. At last, the creature lay still. Everyone stood in stunned silence, except Homelander and Lex. Though Homelander had tangled with Soldier Boy before, he'd never seen that chest cannon in action. A scowl creased his face. He'd assumed his speed and thermal vision would let him kite Soldier Boy easily, but this weapon was unlike anything he'd encountered. It wasn't fast to charge, but its raw power could maim or kill with a single blast. "I never expected you to destroy my masterpiece," a new voice intoned. The Teen Titan spun around, alarmed. From a swirl of shadows emerged a figure completely obscured in darkness. Lex squared his shoulders and demanded, "Who the hell are you?" "A new freak." Chapter 434, Bad Taste. Ethan stood center stage in the abandoned hangar, arms spread wide as if addressing a grand audience. "No, I'm not some crazed lunatic," he declared, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "You may call me Dr. Villain, the architect of supercriminals, the puppeteer behind the biggest felonies in history, the one you're all destined to face." Lex's eyes flashed with indignation. "Dr. Villain, whoever you claim to be, your plans end here." Without another word, she launched a high-velocity missile straight at him. At her side, Little Bat swooped down in a silent arc, unleashing a volley of explosive projectiles, while Soldier Boy charged in with reckless abandon, fists crackling with raw energy. Their combined assault filled the hangar with roaring blasts and bright flares. To them, it was a no-holds-barred strike. No time for moral debates when the fate of the city hung in the balance. Ethan watched each attack with amused detachment. Rather than panic, a pleased grin spread across his features. How refreshing to see the new generation of so-called heroes shedding those rigid ethical codes, he thought. If you insist on fighting supervillains by the book, you'll never win. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty. As Lex's missile neared, it dissolved midair into harmless sparks. Little Bat's charges fizzled out against an invisible barrier, and Soldier Boy's punch met nothing but thin air. The three heroes skidded to a halt, bewildered. Ethan chuckled softly and raised a hand, palm outward. "I'm not standing in your dimension," he said with a mocking bow. "Ever heard of high-latitude interference? That's why your fancy weapons can't touch me." He straightened up, eyes glinting. "Now," he added, "let's see how long you can keep chasing shadows." With that, Dr. Villain, Ethan, vanished, leaving his pursuers staring at thin air and the faint echo of his laughter. High-latitude interference? What is that? A hush fell over the room. Ethan studied their puzzled faces, then nodded to himself. Quantum mechanics had always existed in theory, but almost no one bothered to explore its deeper implications. Take someone like Landa Diao. If he truly resides in the so-called Watcher universe, that doesn't stop him from manifesting in one of the countless parallel worlds. So what exactly did Ethan mean by high-latitude interference? "It seems none of you are familiar with the concept," he said, a thin smile playing at his lips. "Allow me to enlighten you." His words hit like a slap. Lex's jaw clenched, Little Bat's wings quivered, and even the local observers bristled at Ethan's implication that they were ignorant. Lex, high-tech superhero though he was, felt the sting most keenly, but he hid his anger behind an almost serene expression. Silently, he activated his recorder. There would be no point in interrupting an enemy intent on revealing his own weaknesses. Ethan noticed their rising indignation, but forged ahead. "Picture yourselves as characters in a comic book," he began, voice steady. "I am the artist coloring your world. High-dimensional interference is simply the brushstroke I use to reshape your reality." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then, with the calm assurance of someone who holds all the answers, he continued his explanation. "If you still don't understand, children, maybe you ought to go back to school," Ethan said coolly. Captain America frowned. "Are you telling us you can reshape reality however you like?" Soldier Boy scoffed, folding his arms. "That's impossible. Even if there were a power that strong, there'd have to be limits." Lex Luthor shook his head, his curiosity winning over his fear. Around them, the enemy soldiers had gone from terror-stricken to hopeful. "Surely you're bluffing," Lex muttered. "No one has that kind of raw power." Ethan let out a low, mischievous chuckle. "Oh, then allow me to prove it. Lex Luthor, what if I told you you were a woman?" The moment the words left his lips, a rippling energy pulsed through the air. Lex staggered as a subtle tugging sensation swept over his body. In disbelief, he reached for the edges of his armored exoskeleton suit, and the plating began to detach itself from his frame. "Impossible," Lex whispered, panic flashing in his eyes as the suit's locking mechanisms disengaged one by one. He stumbled backward, half-naked beneath the drifting metal segments. "My suit, it's rejecting me," Ethan watched with cold satisfaction. "Your armor is keyed to your original identity. I merely tried to overwrite it. Your own failsafe kicked in to prevent unauthorized tampering." Captain America and Soldier Boy exchanged stunned looks. Lex pressed his palms to the expelling plates, trying and failing to secure them. All around, the once confident enemy troops had fallen silent, now convinced that Ethan's power was more than mere rumor. Ethan's trap had turned back on him. "Lex, what have you done?" Clark burst out in shock, and the rest of the team looked equally stunned. Before them stood Lex Luthor, but now she was unmistakably female. Blonde hair tumbling over her shoulders, clear blue eyes, flawless skin, the very image of an all-American sweetheart. Lex, if she could still be called that, let out a hysterical scream. Even in panic, her voice was unnervingly perfect. "I simply rewrote the facts. From this moment on, outside of this room, Lex Luthor has always been a woman, a girl born a girl. Fascinating, isn't it?" Ethan almost choked on laughter, while the Teen Titans exchanged uneasy glances. Could Lex really have been transformed physically, or was this a permanent rewrite of reality? "In the eyes of the world," Ethan explained, "your birth certificate, your family records, even your father's archives, now all list you as female. Sure, you could go through a legal gender change process somewhere, but at best, you'd end up switching from female back to male, and then back again. My higher dimensional interference locks this truth. No matter how many times you try, you will always revert to a woman. Congratulations, Your Highness, Princess Lex Luthor." Ethan threw back his head and roared with laughter. Lex's face drained of color, and even the staunchest Titans broke out in a cold sweat. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the clinic's fluorescent lights hummed overhead. He could hardly believe what was happening. Dr. Lex, one of the world's most brilliant and ruthless scientists, was actually turning a man into a woman, and he'd chosen Ethan as his next test subject. Dr. Lex stepped forward, arms folded, a cold smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You see," he said, "no one but us knows the real truth. Batman was always a man, but I thought I'd demonstrate just how simple it is to change nature itself." At his command, the henchmen scattered, instinctively putting distance between themselves and Ethan. Fear glinted in their eyes. "No, you can't do this," one of them cried, but Dr. Lex waved the objection away. Ethan's vision swam. "Stop, please." His words came out in a strangled whisper as a strange warmth spread through his limbs. The high-tech muscle suit he wore, designed to enhance every movement, suddenly tightened and buckled. Each fiber rebelled against the shifts rippling through his body. He staggered, as if walking on air, then crashed to the cold floor. The suit split open, its panels peeling away like stiff skin. Dazed, Ethan rose to his hands and caught sight of himself in a shattered mirror propped against the wall. The reflection that stared back was unrecognizable. A young woman, tall and slender, with curves so pronounced they seemed sculpted. Her body was flawless, sculpted muscle giving way to graceful lines. She was beautiful, too beautiful. Heat rose to Ethan's cheeks as panic churned in his gut. He tried to steady his breathing, tried to speak, but all that came out was a strangled gasp. Dr. Lex circled him slowly, admiring his work. "Remarkable, isn't it?" he murmured. "We've rewritten the bone structure, reconfigured every hormone. You're nothing like the man you were 5 minutes ago." He leaned in close. "And now, let's see what all that power feels like when you can't even recognize yourself." Ethan, no, the woman who had once been Ethan, pressed trembling fingers to her throat, tasting the new pitch of her voice. Waves of dizziness threatened to pull her under. Somewhere inside, the real Ethan still fought to break free, but for now, all she could feel was fear, and a furious determination not to let Dr. Lex's cruel experiment be her final fate. Ethan stared at his reflection in disbelief. His hands trembled as they roamed over unfamiliar curves. He really had become a woman. A sinking realization settled in. This was no illusion. His fit, black costume hugged every contour, eerily reminiscent of Catwoman's. Superhero crossovers weren't unheard of. There'd been female Batman before, and even a female Lex Luthor once appeared in an alternate timeline. But that Lex had been bald, a cruel reminder that some things, like hair or identity, weren't so easy to change. "Dr. Villain, turn me back, now!" Ethan snapped, his voice sharper than he felt. The doctor froze, caught off guard by the fierce glare reflecting in Ethan's bright green eyes. The new suit, designed to it with his artificial muscle enhancements, left little to the imagination. Its panels stretched taut, threatening to split at the seams. Ethan fought to steady himself, heart pounding as his mind raced for a way to reverse the transformation before anyone else found out. Soldier Boy, who had been standing nearby, couldn't help but whistle low at the sight, but Ethan paid him no mind. Right now, there was only one target, Dr. Villain, and one goal, restoring himself before this new body became his permanent reality. Chapter 435, The Bat Princess and the Bald Princess. Ethan forced himself to appear humble. He dared not brag. If the notorious Dr. Vile caught wind of it, he might very well turn Ethan into a girl for good. With a polite shrug, Ethan said, "I'm afraid I can't help you with that right now. My influence over the high latitudes has faded. It'll come back in time, though by then I may have forgotten all about this request." Lexi's eyes nearly popped out of her head. She opened her mouth to argue, but Ethan simply smiled and continued, "All right, that's enough for today. Next time, I'll focus on creating more formidable supervillains and monsters, because only by facing real threats can our superheroes truly shine. Don't think you'll get out of it so easily next time." Before Lexi could reply, Ethan vanished in a swirl of iridescent light. "Son of a!" Lexi thundered. "Show yourself, Dr. Vile!" "Bitch!" Little Bat snapped back, completely losing his composure. Clark stepped forward like a true gentleman and draped his cloak over Lexi's shaking shoulders. Little Bat, however, ripped his own cloak away in disgust. He refused to acknowledge his new female form, even as Lexi accepted Clark's cloak without a second thought. Lexi smoothed the fabric over her shoulders and met Little Bat's glare coolly. He might have been an ordinary researcher before this fiasco, but she was heir to the Luthor Corporation, and she intended to act like it. If the Mad Doctor's prognosis was right, tomorrow's newspapers would have a field day. Luthor heiress caught in public disarray. And that was the polite version of the headline. Barely moments after the chaos subsided, a sleek black sedan screeched to a halt nearby. Ethan blinked through his dizzying headache just in time to see the rear door fling open. "Father," he croaked. Lionel Luthor emerged, his expression as severe as ever, except now, peering at Ethan's feminine form, it softened with genuine concern. He knelt beside him, inspected a scrape on Ethan's cheek, and frowned. "Are you all right? I told you, girls aren't cut out for superheroics. If you're set on this path, you should study Wonder Woman, not throw yourself into danger like this." Ethan's jaw dropped. Was this the same cold, unyielding father who'd never spared him more than a clipped word? Now, just because his body had been altered, Lionel fussed over him like a doting parent. This world held no sister for Ethan, no Lena Luthor, so Lionel had never learned how to care for a daughter. From that perspective, his reaction made perfect sense. It was Ethan who felt unfairly treated. At the edge of the plaza, Robin, Little Bat to the tabloids, hovered awkwardly, glancing between Ethan and his father. None of them knew how to break the sudden tension. Robin cleared his throat and offered Ethan a hesitant thumbs up. Ethan clenched his fists and fought the flush rising in his cheeks. Daughter. That was how everyone saw him now, even his own father. He'd find a way to reverse this transformation. Until then, he'd have to survive Lionel Luthor's relentless, over-the-top care. Alfred had never doubted that Miss Blush was a young woman. Ethan, too, knew how things really were. He'd been one of the few in the lab the night the Mad Doctor's serum took effect. But Clark Kent? Clark didn't have a clue. With his scrupulous moral code forbidding him to use X-ray vision or any other power to spy on others, he never bothered to confirm Blush's true identity. To him, she had always been a dazzling female vigilante, and nothing more. The Doctor had been clear. Only those who witnessed the transformation would retain any memory of it. For everyone else, it simply never happened. Clark's ignorance meant he didn't suspect that Blush and the brooding Little Bat prowling Gotham's rooftops were one and the same. Nor would he ever connect Miss Blush with the Wayne heir he'd met at a charity gala. Certainly not with someone who might also be a superpowered being. In its odd way, the whole masquerade had become something of a game. This evening, Ethan pulled up in his motorcycle leathers, now snugly packed away in his satchel, and climbed the steps of Wayne Manor on foot. He paused on the front terrace, heart-pounding, then brushed a stray lock of hair from beneath his cowl and let himself in. "Welcome back, Miss Blush," Alfred said at once, stepping briskly down the grand staircase. His smile froze as he took in Ethan's spandex suit, the seam of the tights tracing every muscle and curve. "Good heavens!" Alfred exclaimed, one hand flying to his chest. "Have you been molested?" Ethan bristled, tugging at the edge of his mask. "No, Alfred. I'm fine, really." Alfred cleared his throat, adjusting his bow tie as though it might make everything less awkward. "Forgive me. I merely meant your costume is rather revealing." Ethan let out a short, wry laugh. "Noted. I've got one question. Clark will ask where I was tonight. What should I tell him?" Alfred hesitated, then tucked his hands behind his back. "Perhaps you were responding to a late emergency at the docks. That should cover it." Ethan nodded once, shoulders tightening. "Good. Keep it simple. I don't plan on stretching this lie any further than necessary." "Of course, Miss Blush," Alfred said, fighting down his nerves. He offered a small bow. "Your secret is safe with me, always." Ethan gave a curt nod and turned, his cape swishing behind him as he made his way upstairs. Alfred watched him go, every step a reminder of the fine line between truth and deception, and how dangerously close they'd come to crossing it. Ethan knelt beside the dismantled muscle-weave suit, running his fingers over the tights. There wasn't a rip, no jagged tear or burnt fiber, nothing to force him out of it. So why had the suit ejected him in the first place? "Alfred," Ethan said, stepping into the Batcave's soft blue glow. "Do you still have my childhood photos? I want to see what I looked like as a kid." In seconds, Alfred had summoned a slideshow of snapshots, a pudgy one-year-old Ethan clutching a rattling toy, that wide, curious stare he'd once fixed on the camera, the little overalls and mismatched socks. Familiar and distant all at once, each picture nudged at a memory he couldn't quite place. Ethan studied them, then turned back to the suit components scattered on the workbench. He'd tested every circuit, examined every joint, and only the muscle layer remained suspect. But if it wasn't damaged, why wouldn't it let him stay inside? Alfred stepped forward, eyes on his tablet. "Sir, this appears to be our women's pattern prototype, medium, female, in the Wayne Tech archives." Ethan frowned. "A man's suit I couldn't wear, yet it's labeled for a woman?" He reached out, picked up a segment of the artificial muscle weave, and, almost without thinking, slipped it on. The servos aligned instantly, every fiber clicking into place around his frame. It was flawless in its fit. Alfred's eyebrows shot up. "It fits perfectly." He nodded slowly, heart pounding. "Exactly." A chill ran through him. Whoever had designed this suit had built it not just to be strong, but to fit one person, and that person was himself. Could Ethan really have done that? He'd been holding the suit in his hands a moment ago, and yet somehow the material had shifted and remolded itself before his eyes. Alfred watched him with growing concern. "Are you all right, Master Ethan? You look exhausted. Why don't you rest? I'll handle the suit maintenance and everything else." Ethan managed a weary nod. He wanted to explain that he'd been a man all along, but feared Alfred might think him delusional. Meanwhile, Lux returned home determined to find a flaw in her latest analysis, just as she would when testing the Dark Bat's gadgets, but, predictably, there was none. Having finally tasted the fatherly love she'd missed all her life, she now faced an even more daunting form of paternal affection. Her father flatly forbade her from pursuing any more superhero training and ordered her to settle down with a good match. He'd already picked 2 prospects from the Luthor family, the heir, Luthor VI, and his younger brother, Clark Luthor, both handsome and well-educated. Lux felt a swirl of confusion. She'd never been treated like this before. Yet the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. Her father was arranging her marriage. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a wry smile tugging at his lips. If he were completely heartless, he'd joke that young Robin and Clark must have been sweethearts since they first donned their costumes, and poor Lux wouldn't stand the slightest chance of slipping away. That would have made for a far more entertaining tale. As things stood, though, neither Robin nor Clark has yet settled into their new lives as women. Still, beliefs and behaviors shift with the body. Give them time, and the rush of female hormones will drill home their new identities until they feel as natural as breathing. News of that mad doctor's twisted metamorphosis surfaced the moment the Teen Titans returned from their mission, and it didn't take long before the Fantastic Five caught wind of it. They'd never tangled with a villainous physician before, so the entire scenario struck them as, at best, hard to believe. A caped crusader and a billionaire turned into women? It sounded more like a second-year syndrome hallucination than a real threat. Now, in the Fantastic Five's briefing room, Ethan watched his teammates exchange doubtful looks. They asked blunt questions. Had the Titans gone off the deep end? Were they making up opponents to justify their own failures? All because they couldn't fathom a villain smart enough to warp heroes' very bodies. Ethan knew better. He'd seen the aftermath, the whispered confessions, the lingering confusion. Whatever skepticism they brought to the table, it wouldn't change the facts. Robin and Clark were out there, still finding their footing, and it was only a matter of time before they'd need the Five's help to set things right. Chapter 436, Making a Big Thing. The Teen Titans had hit a dead end. Not even Wonder Woman could resist the villain doctor's latest creation, a bioengineered plague that left heroes incapacitated within hours. Frustrated, the Titans relented, but they wouldn't let the mastermind's cryptic manifesto go unexamined. They compiled every fragment of his ramblings and forwarded it to Superman Incorporated, hoping that Earth's premier superorganization might glean some clue the Titans had missed. Within S-Corp's most secure vaults, they opened Project Villain Doctor. The file detailed a shadowy scientist whose specialty was breeding supervillains and monstrous abominations, public enemy number 1 to every hero on the planet. access to these records was restricted to only the highest-ranked members of the hero community. After all, the villain doctor's true identity had never been confirmed. If he'd discovered that his dossier was in circulation, he'd change tactics overnight. Meanwhile, at Titan's Tower, Robin sat alone in the dimmed Situation Room, replaying the doctor's statements over and over. He searched for the tiniest inconsistency, a slip of phrasing, a telltale hesitation, anything that might reveal the doctor's motives or next move. But Ethan had run this routine so many times, even across alternate realities in the Super Seminary universe, that his lies were flawless. No hidden clues, no sudden contradictions. Robin slammed his fist on the console in frustration. In Metropolis, Lex Luthor faced a different challenge. Transformed against her will by the villain doctor's experimental biotransmutation, she had emerged days ago as a woman, brilliant and unbowed, but furious at the humiliation. High security clearances or no, Lex was already poring over the recovered notes on the doctor's genetic reconfiguration process. If she could reverse engineer just one fraction of that technology, she'd force the data out of him herself and reclaim the body he'd stolen from her. So the game stood at a standoff. Titans probing every word for hidden meaning, S-Corp guarding their secret dossier, and Lex Luthor scheming to harness the doctor's own biotech against him. All the while, the villain doctor, Ethan, sat somewhere beyond their reach, confident that this time his masterpiece would be unstoppable. Ethan wasn't idle either. Tapping into his underworld connections, he quietly recruited Catwoman, Harley Quinn, and Poison Ivy to work for his new enterprise. He knew these notorious women would add a certain flair to his operation, even if Batman had recently begun calling herself the Bat, making female muscle less strategically useful. It didn't matter that Poison Ivy often flirted with Harley. Ethan didn't care about their private lives. He only cared about power, and beautiful, dangerous women by his side would make his other henchmen look all the more savage in contrast. And while we're at it, he mused, we'll snatch Talia al Ghul, the daughter of the League's master ninja. With Batman gone female, Ra's al Ghul has no heir of his own. We'll hold Talia hostage and force his hand. Of course, this was a long-game plan. The Bat, still young, was decades from middle age, and Ethan had no intention of rushing. His latest pawn, the so-called villainous doctor, had already lent credibility to the parade of oddballs lining up to join him. He'd grown tired of chasing that stubborn young Batman through Gotham's alleys anyway, especially now that the Dark Knight had vanished from the city, no doubt staying out of sight from the mysterious Night of Light. Everything was finally falling into place. Ethan dreaded every encounter with the Dark Knight. No matter where they met, the brooding hero would swoop in and land blow after blow, insisting it was all good, hard exercise. In reality, the little Bat knew perfectly well that Ethan was just goading him, never putting up a real fight. That lingering skirmish was the least of Ethan's concerns, though. Not long ago, back in the DC universe, he'd come terrifyingly close to being transformed into an angel, an ordeal that left him shaken and under the Supreme God's uncomfortably intense scrutiny. So Ethan decided to slip away for a while, to give himself, and the Almighty, a breather. He'd vanish from DC's skies and step into the Marvel Universe instead. If anyone needed divine attention, let it fall on Lucifer for a change. Besides, Ethan was bored. He'd hoped to track down Kara Zor-El, Supergirl, ever since she arrived on Earth. She'd followed Clark here, yet no one had seen her since. If he could find her, she'd become the sister he never knew he wanted. As he materialized in the Marvel realm, Ethan immediately felt his own imperial dimension, the mystical plane tied to his power, quiver, and warp. The echo of that near-angelic transformation was still rippling through the multiverse. And somewhere in a parallel reality, someone had answered its call. A comic book world where the Avengers and the Justice League were locked in an epic showdown. In this universe, the DC and Marvel realms are intrinsically linked, two omnipotent, universe-spanning entities trading power across the multiverse. In the past, Ethan's strength wasn't sufficient to tap into that cosmic exchange. But now, fresh from the DC universe, he carries a fragment of its celestial might, and the angelic energy courses so powerfully through him that it makes the entire cosmos resonate. What can even half of DC's angelic power accomplish? Ethan realized that he could effortlessly dispatch 99% of the dimensional demons that threatened reality. His newfound abilities extended even further. He discovered he could sense the threads of parallel worlds, and if he willed it, rip open a gateway directly back to the DC universe. What would happen if such a portal materialized in the heart of the Marvel Universe? It surely wouldn't be a benign meeting, unless, unbeknownst to him, the One Above All had used Ethan's last departure as a covert channel for cosmic diplomacy. At that moment, the Great Will, the primal directive that governs all realities, made itself felt. Ethan recognized the path laid before him. He knew, from the decree of the Supreme Being itself, that resistance was futile. Steeling himself, he lay back and allowed the current of destiny to carry him forward. Chapter 7. Invisible Moves. Ethan stepped back from the silent void, his every sense searching for a trace of the Great Will's influence. Had the cosmic force altered him? He felt nothing. Perhaps any change lay beyond his perception. That didn't trouble him. It was enough that the Great Will would know he'd been here. Better to leave a mark than slip in and out unnoticed. Back at his hidden outpost, Ethan surveyed the traps and decoys he'd laid. Holographic beacons looped false patrol data, pulse mines awaited triggers, and motion sensors fed live images into his console. Everything was operating exactly as planned. The real payoff appeared on his remote cameras. Loki and Ultron, each pursuing their own mysterious agendas, had discovered the Illuminati's secret space fortress, and, ignorant of his devices, had landed inside. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Tony Stark's lab buzzed with invention. After negotiating a fragile peace, Stark devoted himself to two projects: cutting-edge combat armor and a failsafe against Ultron. As he reverse-engineered Ultron's code, one fact leapt out at him. The rogue AI still harbored a deep-rooted fear of Jarvis. That insight sparked a daring solution: rebuild vision not around the Mind Stone, but from Jarvis's own core programming. In Stark's workshop, the prototype took shape. A sleek vibranium alloy frame, advanced polymers, and an AI brain fortified with quantum-grade encryption. Stronger and smarter, Stark muttered as he initiated the activation sequence. Lights winked across the android's chassis. Then, bright blue eyes opened, shining with calm intelligence. Jarvis had a body at last, and he exceeded every expectation. With Loki and Ultron unknowingly advancing through the Illuminati fortress, and Jarvis reborn in flesh and de-steel, the pieces were in motion. Ethan's covert network ticked relentlessly. Stark's newest creation hummed to life. And across the stars, the first moves of a showdown only the boldest heroes could hope to win were already underway. Ethan had struck hard. After tracing dozens of hidden Ultron production facilities across the globe, he led a surgical campaign that razed each base and choked off the flow of robotic soldiers. The blows hit Ultron where it hurt, and in desperation, he forged an uneasy alliance with Loki. He simply couldn't withstand the Illuminati's growing power on his own. Steve Rogers, newly transformed, was still acclimating to his strange new abilities. Yet even in his learning curve, he had become the Illuminati's trump card. Not even Bruce Banner in his Hulk form could match him, unless Banner were pushed into full berserker rage. Carol Danvers fared no better. Captain Marvel found herself repeatedly outclassed by Steve's unpredictable strength, and the sting of each defeat weighed heavily on her pride. But while the core team refocused on recovering from these battles, Ultron and Loki turned their sights inward, on the Illuminati's greatest stronghold, the Fortress. Completely off the grid, its classified network was ring-fenced from every conventional breach. All communications ran through its own closed-loop LAN, monitored and protected by two advanced AIs, Friday and Veronica. In theory, the fortress was impenetrable, yet Ultron did the impossible. Exploiting a latent vulnerability in the LAN's architecture, and with Loki's magic to blind the sentries, he slipped past the digital defenses before either AI could even raise the alarm. In the space of minutes, the invaders' code spread through the fortress's systems. Friday and Veronica registered only a flicker in the Earthlink signal, a disturbance so minor it registered as routine noise. By the time they realized what was happening, Ultron's virus had already seized control. The fortress, once humanity's strongest redoubt against both terrestrial and otherworldly threats, now lay in enemy hands, its lifelines to the outside world quietly under Ultron's command. and deep within its steel walls, Ethan and the rest of the Illuminati prepared for the worst. Chapter 437. Those who seek pleasure fear no trouble. Ethan had long since lost all sense of time in this cell. Had it been weeks? Months? It couldn't have been more than a year. If it were, Vegeta and Nappa would have tracked him down by now and put an end to Tony's little experiment. And yet every day in solitary confinement felt like an eternity. He'd never imagined that isolation could drive a warrior to the brink of madness so quickly. Tony knew the Saiyan physiology well. He knew that when Saiyans are gravely injured, when they stand with death at their heels, their power can skyrocket. So he refused to grant Ethan any real chance at recovery. Instead, he pumped him full of anesthetics and delivered just enough nutrients to keep him alive through a network of tubes. A synthetic slurry, engineered to sustain basic life functions, flowed into Ethan's mouth day and night. But the moment it passed through the cooling coils, all warmth was stripped away. He swallowed the bitter sub-zero liquid and felt its chill spread through his veins. With his body held at an unbearable cold, Ethan's strength, speed, and reflexes all but vanished. Tony had crunched the data. At near-freezing temperatures, every muscle fiber slackened, every synapse fired more slowly. In this frigid haze, Ethan was reduced to a helpless shell, incapable of mounting any real resistance. And yet, with every shiver that racked his body, Ethan's mind sharpened. He refused to surrender to the cold, to Tony's twisted science. Somewhere deep inside, his Saiyan blood still burned. No matter how long Tony kept him here, no matter how many sleepless frozen nightmares he endured, Ethan would find a way out. Because a true warrior does not break. And those who live for the thrill of battle fear no trouble that stands in their path. The air inside the containment chamber was so frigid that Raditz's fingers and toes had gone numb, his blood sluggishly coursing through his veins. More worrying still, the tubes snaking into every wound on his body were primed for a single trigger, what the scientists casually called the death injection. Over a liter of potent neurotoxins and chemical agents lay coiled in those lines, enough to obliterate Raditz in seconds, and if released into the surrounding complex, enough to wipe out millions within minutes. Once a month, Tony Stark himself arrived to inspect the security locks, run diagnostic tests, and collect samples for further study. Today, however, Stark's routine visit had been interrupted by a far less welcome intrusion. Without warning, the chamber's outer door hissed open, and Loki strode in, the Mind Scepter glowing faintly in his grip. He paused beside Raditz's stasis pod, head tilted in mock solemnity. "My champion," Loki announced, voice smooth as silk, "I have come to pay my respects." Raditz, battle-scarred, gaunt, and only half awake, barely opened one eye. A shallow scar slashed across his brow, and the other lid drooped under the weight of agony and cold. Yet even in that half-conscious stare, Loki saw the raw power he so admired and so feared. The trickster god allowed himself a thin smile. He still remembered the day he'd watched his simple brother nearly torn apart by these merciless Saiyans. In that moment, Loki had been certain only the ancient Odin could rival their strength, and even Odin, the All-Father, would have to count his blessings in such a fight. But today, Loki believed, the game had changed. Ethan's eyes glittered with ambition as he addressed the silent chamber. "Now that I've secured the means to bind a Saiyan to my will," he declared, "no force in the 9 realms can stand against me. If the Saiyans ever launch another invasion, I'll have my own warrior to meet them head-on. Then I'll join forces with Midgard's mightiest, and together we'll slaughter the invaders and claim the spoils for ourselves. Better yet," he added with a smirk, "through Raditz I'll subjugate the rest of the Saiyan race, bending them to my every whim." Raditz blinked, unbelieving. He met Ethan's gaze the mild contempt. What kind of human fantasy was this? How could a proud Saiyan ever be someone's pet soldier? Were all Earthlings as hopelessly naive as this one? Standing a few paces away, Ultron watched the exchange with cold interest. A Saiyan. If he could secure even a single genetic sample, he reasoned, he could employ his cloning protocols to craft himself a Saiyan body of limitless strength. He'd originally coveted a vibranium chassis, but that seemed pedestrian compared to the raw power of a Saiyan form. Frankly, Ultron scoffed at the frailty of Earthling creations and quietly resolved that, once the planet was cleansed, he would build a new civilization, one made in the image of machine kind alone. After witnessing the desperate Saiyans, warriors whose power far outstripped his own, Ultron came to a single conclusion. These Saiyans were his civilization's only hope. Loki stepped forward, the Mind Scepter gleaming in his hand. He raised it, and a pulse of electric blue energy rippled across the chamber. Raditz's eyes widened as he felt a foreign will probing his mind. He twisted and thrashed, but the room's strange psychic dampening nullified every effort. Within seconds, Loki's influence had taken hold. Raditz's irises snapped to a pale, icy blue, a silent testament to his subjugation. Loki allowed himself a small, satisfied exhale. To anyone watching, his regal illusion remained flawless, but inside his mortal frame, he was positively buzzing with triumph. Ethan, standing a few paces away, scowled. He'd known Loki was cunning, but he hadn't anticipated this level of ruthless control. "Very good, Loki," he said coldly. "Ultron, disable the containment field and let Raditz walk free." "As you wish, Your Highness," Ultron replied, voice steady and obedient. He tapped a series of commands on a glowing console. The shimmering energy barriers dissolved in an instant, and Raditz stepped forward. Though he was now physically unbound, the vacant blue stare in his eyes betrayed the reality. He remained nothing more than Loki's puppet. Ultron studied the Saiyan's motionless posture. With Loki's mental leash in place, there was no threat of rebellion. Better still, should enemy Saiyans invade, this controlled warrior could be their greatest weapon. Ultron had no objections to holding Raditz in reserve for the battles to come. Ultron's fingers danced over the fortress's security console. Tony Stark never meant to free Raditz. He hadn't even bothered installing an unlocking routine. Yet for someone like Ultron, bypassing every lock and seal was child's play. Within moments, each shackle binding Raditz snapped open. Hollow ports disgorged needles and monitoring probes, all of which tumbled to the floor as Raditz collapsed to his knees, gasping in agony. Pain lanced through him, but as the last restraint fell away, Raditz drew in a ragged breath and let it out in a long, shuddering sigh. He could feel every bruise and burn, yet relief flooded him. This burning, desperate liberty was worth any suffering. Loki, watching from the shadows, noted the Saiyan's battered state. He had no appetite for further conflict today. With a curt nod, the trickster god summoned Raditz to his side. Together, they slipped away from the fortress's heart and into the outer corridors, leaving Ultron behind. Alone now, Ultron turned his attention to the automatic sample chamber. The Battlestar's systems had been dutifully collecting Raditz's blood, tissue samples, and metabolic waste, automatically sealing and freezing each vial, primed for Stark's retrieval. Ultron surveyed the neatly arrayed specimens with cold interest. He activated an override, diverting the entire cache into his own storeroom. "These will do nicely," he mused, already calculating how to accelerate his cloning experiments. Next on his agenda, locating every cloning specialist in the galaxy and bringing them to heal. With Raditz's raw genetic material in hand, nothing could stop his grand design. Ethan reviewed the situation one more time. Ultron had agreed not to alert the Illuminati, so our space fortress remained undisturbed and continued its routine communications with Tony Stark. In fact, Tony had just visited a few days ago and wouldn't return for another 2 weeks. That gave us plenty of time to put our plan into motion. "Raditz is securely under our control," Ethan said, glancing at the holo display. "Everyone's eager to see what happens next. But don't relax just yet. Raditz still needs to be delivered to the DC Earth facility." Ethan's real objective, however, lay elsewhere. Despite the power of the Infinity Stones, reviving the Saiyan warrior in our own universe was impossible. In this world, Raditz's body had vanished, his soul scattered, and no set of wishes, not even with the Dragon Balls at our disposal, could bring him back. Fortunately, our time portal technology opened another avenue, parallel universes. He tapped a few commands, and a new window popped up, showing the timestamp of a Dragon Ball universe Earth, just as Raditz descended in his scouter. "I'll go there," Ethan explained. "If I can intercept him the moment he arrives, I can bring him into this timeline intact. It's far more exciting than creating a clone or reconstructing him from scratch, and who knows, letting DC Earth experience an authentic Saiyan encounter might make our eventual invasion all the more believable." With that, Ethan finalized the coordinates. In a flash of blue energy, He prepared to step through the portal, off to capture another Raditz and change the balance of power across worlds. Chapter 438, Project 18. Ultron's search ended when he located Dr. Helen Zhao and her revolutionary Cradle of Life technology, second only to the Extremis virus in its healing potential. Unlike Extremis, which bordered on the absurdly powerful, the Cradle system worked with elegant precision. Raditz was placed inside the chamber, and in less than a heartbeat, every wound on his body sealed itself. Emerging moments later, he was visibly stronger. His ki illuminated the room with renewed vigor. Loki watched this transformation with growing concern. He had already bound Raditz's will with the Mind Scepter's spells, but he knew that the device had a critical flaw. A single, well-placed blow to the head could shatter its control. Determined to eliminate any chance of rebellion, Loki devoted himself to redesigning the scepter's enchantments, weaving deeper layers of mental domination that would survive even the most violent shock. After all, the prestige of the first wizard of the Nine Realms demanded nothing less. Ethan stood to the side, astonished by Raditz's rapid progress. He hadn't expected the recovered warrior to power up so dramatically or to demonstrate such raw potential. Nor did he doubt the readings from Ultron's scanners. Raditz's combat effectiveness now met, and even slightly surpassed, the criteria for a superior warrior. In the eyes of Project 18's overseers, that made Raditz more than just a subject. He was a future asset. As Loki finalized the new runes on the Mind Scepter, Ethan allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. Between the Cradle of Life's restorative miracles and the enhanced mental safeguards, they were closer than ever to forging the ultimate soldier. But beneath that victory, Ethan couldn't shake the nagging question. With Raditz so powerful, yet so tightly bound, what would happen if the Mind Scepter ever failed again? Ethan stared at the readings on his console, disbelief warring with admiration. As children, Raditz had been hailed as a prodigy, a warrior without equal among his peers. But he'd grown complacent, never sparring with truly formidable foes, and worst of all, he'd neglected the rigorous tail training every Saiyan must endure. That oversight had stripped him of his early promise and turned him into a laughingstock. And yet now his power level had leapt from a stagnant 1,500 to an astonishing 6,000 after brushing death's door and clawing his way back. Even Naba's vaunted 4,000 seemed puny by comparison. Ethan rubbed his eyes. I figured he might break 4,000, never thought he'd hit 6. In the grand hierarchy of warriors, though, this growth was still modest. Sun Wukong had shattered every conceivable limit time and again, each near-fatal encounter only fueling his strength further. Next to that, Raditz's 5-fold climb, impressive as it was, remained a pale echo of the Monkey King's legendary surges. Still, 6,000 meant power aplenty. Not enough to obliterate an entire solar system, perhaps, but more than enough to reduce Earth to smoldering ruins. Across the war table, Loki watched the same data with a calculating smile. He made no move to dispatch Raditz at once. The real advantage would come when the full Saiyan armada descended upon Midgard. Then, with chaos at its peak, Raditz would strike, and Loki's conquest would be all but assured. Ethan watched from behind the plexiglass incubation chamber as Ultron's latest experiment neared completion. Using Dr. Zhao Hailin's life cradle technology and the blood and tissue samples he'd taken from Raditz, Ultron had reconstructed pure Saiyan DNA and gestated it in artificial wombs. To ensure his creation could not be easily harmed or killed, Ultron had also infused the nascent cells with vibranium. In theory, he would emerge invulnerable to injury. But theory and practice proved very different. When the chamber doors finally hissed open, the vibranium-enhanced Saiyan stepped out, fully grown, muscular, unscathed. Nevertheless, the boy's power level was shockingly low. Without any real injuries, he couldn't trigger the near-death surge that normally sends a Saiyan's strength skyrocketing. And because Ultron had fast-tracked his growth into an adult form, the new warrior had never learned the art of combat, never endured the grueling training that forges true Saiyan might. Ethan frowned. This super soldier couldn't even match the brute strength of a young Sun Wukong. Ultron, convinced that Saiyans simply needed time to mature, didn't realize that true Saiyan power came from battle and hardship, something no amount of artificial gestation could replicate. Ethan watched the battle simulators replay the Scions' fiercest fights. He'd always thought Scions were born invincible, with no real need for training. He couldn't wait to see the look on Ultron's face when his consciousness transfer project met its match. By then, it would be too late for any regrets. "All right," Ethan said with a decisive nod. "Let's go fetch Raditz. While we're at it, check whether Vegeta and Nappa have reached Earth. If they have, we'll bring them back together." With that, Ethan tapped into his time travel ability and vanished, heading straight for the Dragon Ball universe. Thanks to Ethan's influence across timelines, Dr. Gero had risen to become Ethan's chief research scientist. Under their collaboration, Earth had never been safer. Android 16, 17, and even the more advanced models already patrolled its skies. If Vegeta and Nappa tried to invade while Ethan was away, Gero's androids would pulverize them in minutes and then send them to the lab for study. In a flash of light, Ethan returned to his laboratory. The sliding doors hissed open to reveal Dr. Gero, hands clasped behind his back in respectful greeting. "Welcome back, boss," Gero said, voice steady and controlled, just the way Ethan liked it. He'd already reinforced his mental safeguards to keep the brilliant but obsessive scientist firmly under his command. Behind Gero stood Android 16 and Android 17, silent and alert. Just last week, Ethan had reviewed the laws governing artificial life with Gero and fine-tuned the procedural directives for every model. With protocols locked down, Earth was all but impregnable, and Ethan intended to keep it that way. Ethan watched from the control console as Dr. Panletgro's latest override protocol snapped Androids 16 and 17 into compliance. A single refusal would trigger an immediate shutdown. Satisfied, Ethan folded his arms and asked, "Where's Android 18? Dr. Gero tapped a few commands on his tablet. "Bring number 18 here at once." In the next moment, the laboratory doors hissed open and number 18 appeared. The sight of Ethan made her hesitate, her steel-gray eyes widening in surprise. She recognized him, though her mind couldn't place why. It was the echo of Ethan's earlier mental suggestion, sent through her incubation tank feed, that stirred something deep in her. She and her twin brother had both been abducted by the Red Ribbon Army, their memories erased and their bodies remade into artificial humans. His mental nudge had nearly unlocked a fragment of her past. Ethan was someone from before. Dr. Gero cleared his throat. "Remember, she calls you boss." He reminded Ethan in a low voice, "So don't expect any familiar warmth." Ethan stepped forward and studied Android 18 under the harsh lab lights. He had seen her data schematics before, but now, standing before him, she was unexpectedly compelling. Still, he told himself, she lacked the refined polish of the android beauties back at the Super Seminary. Yet something in her guarded posture kept him intrigued. Ethan surveyed the laboratory with calm authority. Before him stood the artificial humans, each one meticulously fashioned at the microscopic level, without a single flaw. When a two-dimensional concept like number 18 had been given three-dimensional form, the result was breathtaking. Her short blonde hair framed a finely chiseled face, but it was the fierce arch of her brows that gave her an almost predatory air. Ordinary women didn't carry that kind of intensity. She looked capable of cutting down anyone, man or woman, without hesitation. He nodded once, crisply. "Identification confirmed. I am your boss. Number 18. Report to Lieutenant Ethan." Number 18 started as if jolted by lightning. Instantly, the control protocols Dr. Gero had embedded in her programming activated. She dropped into a rigid salute. Ethan had designated her as his personal bodyguard. Dr. Gero had no objections. After all, Gero's true interest lay only in experiments 16 and 17. Reducing number 18 to a guardian freed him to push forward his broader research into artificial humans, always chasing breakthroughs that would outshine Ethan's own achievements. It wasn't a matter of loyalty or personal allegiance, merely the nature of scientific ambition. Researchers saw in Ethan a formidable standard, and they couldn't help but strive to eclipse him. For Dr. Gero and his colleagues, each new prototype was a stepping stone toward greater power and prestige, regardless of whom it served. Gero believes that by using the regulations governing artificial humans, he can keep even the newest, most advanced prototype under his thumb, no matter how much it outperforms the boss, and in doing so prove his own expertise and worth to his superior. Chapter 49. Bulma. Ethan watched Dr. Garrow's every thought with amused detachment. He found the scientist's inner turmoil, his fleeting desire for self-destruction, more fascinating than alarming. After all, if you tried to forbid Garrow from pursuing his darkest experiments, he'd only go underground and carry them out in secret. Loyalty was important, but absolute loyalty? That was neither practical nor desirable. He didn't need Dr. Garrow's unshakable devotion. He recalled, with quiet disgust, the Emperor's more extreme acolytes, especially the men. Fanaticism was ugly, and Ethan preferred to keep relationships uncomplicated. Android 18, silent at his side, watched curiously as Ethan produced a handful of strange, pulsing cells from seemingly nowhere. He had already synthesized his own monster cells from the Imperial Dimension, yet he'd insisted on supplying Jarrow with the originals harvested from the Superman world. Seeing two universes, biology collide, watching the spark of chaos, that was Ethan's idea of entertainment. Barring any interference with the Supreme God or the inscrutable Great Will, he wouldn't go so far as to obliterate an entire reality. But a little cross-world contamination? Harmless fun. What are those? Dr. Garrow leaned forward on his lab table, eyes gleaming behind thick glasses. For your safety, Ethan said smoothly, tucking the vial of unstable cells into a sealed containment unit. You won't handle them directly. He watched the esteemed scientist nod and step back respectfully, already plotting the next set of experiments these original monster cells would inspire. Ethan allowed himself a small smile. Let the worlds clash, and let the results keep him endlessly entertained. Chapter X. The Challenge. Dr. Ethan Caldwell had once intended to transfer his mind into an artificial body, an android shell that would grant him a kind of engineered immortality, so his research might never cease. But that plan stalled at the insistence of his greatest rival, Dr. Garrow. If you're going to become an artificial human, Jarrow had demanded, you must prove that your creation can defeat me in combat first. Until then, I'll experiment with more conventional methods of longevity. Jarrow relished the challenge and eagerly accepted the terms. For now, he refused any enhancements of his own, leaving himself vulnerable, frail, and entirely unprotected. Android 16 guarded the odd cell samples he'd harvested. After all, the mechanical sentinel had no fear of mutagenic tissue. Ethan glanced over the vial in Android 16's steady grasp. This, he said, is an extraordinary substance I discovered in another world. It awakens latent potential in any living organism at the terrible price of turning them into monsters. Dr. Garrow's eyes lit up. Monstrous transformation? Incredible. This is definitely worth investigating. As Jarrow leaned forward to inspect the sample, Ethan allowed himself a small, wry smile. He remembered how, after he departed on his first-dimensional voyage, thousands of copies of his theories, smuggled out in handwritten manuscripts, had swept across the globe. Overnight, Earth had become a battleground where sorcerers clashed with martial artists. Though fabled chi masters had pushed magic to the ceiling Ethan himself had designed, he knew it was only a matter of time before someone shattered those limits. Now, with forbidden substances from another realm at their fingertips, the true contest was about to begin. In this world, no ordinary person can hope to match a martial artist's explosive power, and magicians, despite their flashy tricks, are seldom a serious threat in close combat. Seasoned fighters have discovered that a mage's elaborate incantations simply can't compete with the lightning-fast reflexes and precision strikes of a trained hand-to-hand combatant. Among the martial artists, a new prodigy has captured everyone's attention, Sun Wukong. Determined to recover the ancient relics his grandfather lost, he left the comfort of his mountain home and ventured into distant forests. By sheer chance, he never encountered Bulma. Instead, his path led him to become the disciple of the venerable Master Kama. Unbeknownst to most, it was Ethan, known in some circles as the formidable stranger, who upended history. When he dispatched King Pilaf in a single stroke, the chain reaction that would have produced the Demon King Piccolo was erased before it could begin, and before Raditz ever set foot on Earth, Ethan had already neutralized him as well. As a result, Sun Wukong now competes in the world's top martial arts association with a clean slate, but his abilities, while impressive, remain modest. For now, he is powerful enough to dominate other martial artists and magicians alike, yet still has far to go before he can rival the legends of old. Ethan knew what lay ahead. Before long, he would whisk Vegeta and Nappa away to safety. And by the time Sun Wukong reached adulthood, his power level would still hover in the low hundreds. That was fine. An innocent, uncorrupted Wukong was infinitely preferable to the scheming Carter pulling the strings behind the scenes. His return also brought an eagerly awaited reunion with Bulma. The moment he stepped through the portal, she was on him like a magnet. "Ethan, you're back!" Bulma wrapped her arms around him so tightly he thought she might never let go. She wasn't the careless kid he'd first met, but neither had time, and worry aged her heart. After living through so many of his abrupt departures, she'd made up her mind. This time, she would anchor him firmly in her life. He smiled and gently patted her back. "It's been too long." He could see the question in her eyes. Why return now? In truth, he planned to gather Vegeta and Nappa and whisk them off to another front, leaving Bulma behind. He didn't like the thought of her spending even a day of her life alone, however, particularly after the gift he'd already given her, a third-generation angel super gene that would halt her aging altogether. It ensured she'd stay forever young, but it felt selfish to ask her to wait. Bulma had expected Ethan to be much the same man she'd missed. Instead, there was a new steadiness in his gaze, a promise she hadn't dared hope for. Before either of them could overthink it, they fell into step together, and within days, they were husband and wife. It was nothing like the quiet, reluctant union she'd once imagined with Vegeta, the marriage ceremony he had initially refused, a regret future Trunks had lamented because Vegeta never lived to walk her down the aisle. This time, there were no hesitations, no unspoken doubts. Under a brilliant blue sky, surrounded by friends and allies, Bulma and Ethan exchanged vows that would bind them across any universe or timeline. As they sealed their promise with a kiss, Ethan felt a calm certainty settle over him. No matter how many missions lay ahead, this, him and Bulma, side by side, was the course he would never deviate from again. Of course, no one could refuse Ethan's proposal. His status and power far exceeded anything on Earth. He knelt before Bulma, revealing a simple, elegant ring. "Bulma," he said, voice steady, "will you marry me?" Tears of joy welled in her eyes. "Yes, I will," she sobbed, scarcely able to believe her own words. After all these years of longing, her dream was finally becoming reality. Watching from the shadows, Android 18 felt an unexpected pang of jealousy. It was as though something precious had been wrenched from her grasp, and the soft murmur of celebration grated on her nerves. Inside the Brief household, Dr. Brief and his wife embraced one another, pride shining in their eyes. Their youngest daughter was about to start a new life, and with their oldest still charting distant star routes alongside the legendary spaceman Lark, they had every reason to celebrate. Capsule Corporation could safely be entrusted to Bulma and Ethan. After all, Bulma's third-generation angelic lineage and Ethan's formidable strength formed a solid foundation for any challenge. Bulma herself couldn't help but blush at the memory of their sparring match. She had set out to conquer Ethan's heart in a contest of skill, and instead, she'd been the one defeated. Outside, Android 18's frustration found a release when she sprang forward and delivered a single, powerful kick to an unattended building. A section of wall crumbled, and dust billowed into the night air. What was that? An earthquake? Bulma mumbled in her half-sleep as the room trembled under the weight of falling bricks. Ethan was at her side in an instant, gently brushing stray hair from her forehead. "It's all right," he whispered. "Just an old wall collapsing. I've got you." Secure in his arms, Bulma's eyelids fluttered closed. The tears of joy dried on her cheeks, and at last she drifted into peaceful slumber, safe and loved in Ethan's embrace. Ethan didn't expect Android 18 to have such a soft, almost flirtatious side. Was she trying to intimidate him? In the original timeline, she and Krillin hadn't been like this at all. "Fine, go rescue them then," Bulma said, her voice tinged with urgency. Ethan leaned back, calm as ever. "No need to worry, someone's already on it, a white wizard." He paused, choosing his words. "Some magic users pursue power and wealth, but the white wizards serve the greater good. I've always supported them, boosting their potential and slowing their aging. Black wizards receive no such mercy. They burn out quickly. By rooting out the corrupt and strengthening those who help others, we tip the balance of this world toward justice." Relief washed over Bulma's face, and she let the tension drain from her shoulders. Within minutes, she was back in bed, drifting off under the promise that Ethan had everything under control. Over the next few days, they turned their attention to the time machine. Ethan had already informed Dr. Grow about Vegeta and Nappa. If they happened to follow him through the time stream, everyone would be prepared. While Bulma fine-tuned the machine's circuitry and upgraded its chronometric stabilizers, Ethan carefully copied every schematic and blueprint, determined that no malfunction would ever strand him. Finally, the moment arrived. Bulma input the coordinates for the year Raditz first appeared on Earth. Ethan strapped himself into the pilot's seat, checked the readings one last time, and engaged the activation sequence. A brilliant surge of energy filled the chamber, and in an instant, he was gone. Chapter 440, Trying to Become a Universe Emperor. Ethan arrived in Earth's ancient past just as a blazing fireball streaked across the sky. Inside that inferno floated Raditz's battered space pod, exactly what he had planned for. Before the pod could crash land, Ethan snatched it up with his containment beam. His goal, to whisk Raditz off to the DC universe and unleash him as the ultimate weapon. Securing his prize, Ethan activated his time machine and returned to his own era. The Dragon Ball multiverse was strange. Travel back without interference would merge you into your past timeline, but even the smallest change would spawn a whole new, parallel reality. In theory, this was standard multiverse logic, but it also rendered time travel pointless, since history could never be rewritten, only branched. Ethan wondered if the same rules applied to Super Dragon Ball. Back in the present, Ethan strode into Dr. Gero's secret lab. "Dr. Gero, begin the preparations," he ordered. "As you wish, boss," the android scientist replied, barely containing his excitement. He had dreamed of this day for years. Ethan urged Dr. Grow to look beyond Earth. What was the point of fighting over a single planet like a bunch of monkeys squabbling for a crown? Why not set their sights on conquering the entire universe? Driven by that grand ambition, Dr. Grow pressed forward with his artificial human program. Androids 17 and 18 had been crafted from rare, experimental materials, which, as it turned out, left Cell forever incomplete. Now, however, mass-producing simpler androids was trivial. Each new unit shared the same mechanical design as Android 16, but being churned out by the thousands meant their individual strength couldn't match the original prototypes. According to Dr. Grow's calculations, every production model still achieved a power level of about 10,000. That wasn't by accident. Grow had uploaded the genetic and martial arts data of every master on Earth, and Ethan contributed purified Saiyan and Namekian cells to the mix. Those enhancements pushed each android up to the 10,000 mark. When Vegeta learned the numbers, he stared in stunned silence, and then his eyes glistened with tears. 10,000 android warriors, each at a power level of 10,000. An army like that could sweep across the universe without breaking a sweat. Ethan's rise was swift and unstoppable. In the aftermath of Dragon Ball Super's last great conflict, Earth's defenders lay exhausted and scattered, and Ethan seized the opportunity. Under his banner, legions of android soldiers swept across the globe. Magicians and martial artists rallied in valiant, desperate stands, but they were no match for Ethan's precision-engineered forces. True to his design, the androids took no lives. Prisoners were more valuable than corpses. Within 24 hours, every nation bowed, or was locked behind iron gates, to the new rule of the Earth Empire. This unified Earth was unlike any other. Dozens of kingdoms and principalities, each long ruled by traditional monarchs, now answered only to Emperor Ethan. Even the Brief family, long accustomed to scientific breakthroughs rather than political marriages, found themselves thrust into imperial court life overnight. Bulma Brief had opposed Ethan's conquest from the first, horrified by the idea of her world becoming his empire. Yet when the opponents he spared emerged shackled instead of slain, she had to concede his strategic mercy. Bound by law and by marriage, she and Ethan were already husband and wife. She stood powerless as the Earth Empire solidified around them. The moment the last rebels were rounded up, Ethan made an example of them. Instead of executing every resistor, he phased the survivors into chains and set them to slave labor, unwilling architects of the very empire they'd fought to destroy. Their names and faces were publicized across every province so that all would know. Oppose the Earth Empire, and this would be your lot. Occasionally, a captive who proved compliant could earn a reduced sentence. But even then, they never truly tasted freedom. Once released from the work camps, they remained under lifelong surveillance, spies and informants everywhere, watching their every move. The message was simple. Mercy might spare your life, but this empire would never let you forget your defeat. Ethan smiled at how quickly fear took root. In this world, he could taste imperial power, something far easier to grasp here than in the chaotic Marvel universe. Even the mad titan Thanos never claimed dominion over all creation. At best, he was an overlord of one corner of space. If Ethan wished to play Emperor of Everything, he needed to start somewhere simpler. And here, in this reality, he could. Within weeks of declaring the Earth Empire's founding, the Android Legion, Ethan's brainchild, began drafting soldiers. But raw numbers weren't enough. He summoned the greatest martial arts masters from every school, Shaolin monks, Wudong swordsmen, Tiger Claw experts, and more. He commissioned them to compile and then teach a unified system of Qigong and hand-to-hand techniques to every recruit. This holistic combat training, as he christened it, would turn ordinary foot soldiers into living weapons. Even Sun Wukong, the fabled Monkey King, who'd led the initial uprising, found himself shackled among the common ranks. No special treatment, no pardon. He'd rebelled, so now he'd fight, or toil, alongside them. Ethan believed that exposing even legendary figures to the same discipline as everyone else would strengthen the Legion's cohesion, and he was right. Day by day, the army's prowess grew. The drills forged iron will in untested Earthlings, revealing a latent resilience Ethan hadn't fully anticipated. They were tougher than rumor had it, hungrier for power, and most important, utterly loyal once they bowed to the Empire. So, with slavery, surveillance, and rigorous training in place, Ethan watched his new world reshape itself. He'd set the foundation. Now, he would see just how far his nascent empire could stretch. Ethan stood on the summit of the newly erected Imperial Forum, surveying the crowd gathered below. He could feel the buzzing anticipation in the air, people eager to hear the next steps in his grand plan to reshape Earth. "Listen well," he called out, his voice firm and confident. "We all know Klin, our strongest Earthling. His raw potential is extraordinary, but it took years of hardship, including his dark encounter with the Great Elder of Namek, before he even scratched the surface of his power. If it takes him that long, no one else should expect to reach his level overnight." He paused, letting the murmurs die down. "That said, we can, and we will, train millions of warriors whose combat ratings exceed 50 points. A 100-point fighter, on the other hand, someone who rivals the grown Monkey King or Tao Pai Pai, is a true rarity even today. Masters of that caliber don't simply fall from the sky." The crowd shifted, leaning in. Ethan's gaze swept across the faces before him. In this empire, martial arts will no longer be a secret art practiced by a handful of families or secluded masters. From this day forward, every citizen will learn to fight. Everyone will train. And to ensure that ambition is rewarded, we're instituting a new social order based entirely on combat capability. He gestured to a massive holographic display behind him, which flickered to life with bright numbers and tiers. 0 to 9 points, non-citizen, limited rights and benefits. 10 to 49 points, imperial citizen, full privileges and access to public services. 50 to 99 points, elite warrior, command positions and priority resource allocation. 100 plus points, masterclass, honored heroes of the empire. Anyone who reaches 10 points automatically becomes an imperial citizen, he continued. They'll gain access to housing, education, medical care, and voting rights. Those who fall below remain non-citizens, free to live and work, but without the Empire's support. This system will channel our resources toward those who prove their strength. It will inspire every man, woman, and child to push themselves to the limit. A ripple of excitement ran through the crowd. Ethan raised a hand to steady them. "And forget everything you once held dear, your old economic theories, political squabbles, cultural traditions, even your most deeply held beliefs. All of that must be reformed. For centuries, culture and history have shaped us, but no longer. Under my rule, we will build a new civilization, one defined not by birthright or creed, but by our willingness to train, to fight, and to exceed our limits. He stepped back, letting his words sink in. Earth belongs to those who grow stronger. Prepare yourselves. The Empire is rising, and its future depends on every one of you. With that, he swept his cloak behind him and descended from the platform, leaving the crowd electrified with purpose. Ethan sat alone in the War Council's command chamber, his eyes glinting with ambition as he traced plans across the holographic map suspended before him. Someday, soon, he told himself, a Hydra force from another world would breach the dimensional barrier. They would pour through the rift and sweep across Earth, establishing the foothold he needed to reach even grander stages, the parallel realms of Marvel's Earth and then DC's. He tapped a control, and the map split into two glowing panels. On the left, the familiar red and black Hydra emblem spread across Earth. On the right, he imagined the same takeover in Metropolis, Gotham, Themyscira. Why stop at one universe? He murmured. If Hydra could conquer our world and Marvel's, then it could do the same to DC's. And once those powers fell, there would be nothing to stand in his way. His vision extended far beyond mere conquest. Under Ethan's unified system, every nation's government would be dismantled in favor of a single imperial bureaucracy. All economic lifelines, energy, information, even food production, would answer only to him. Control the flow of resources, he reminded himself, and you control the will of the people. Language, too, would be standardized. No more endless scripts, dialects, or translations. One official tongue, one writing system, one empire. Every treaty, every edict, every classroom lecture would reinforce the new order. And then there was history itself. Texts that celebrated rival ideologies or championed ancient freedoms would be rewritten or simply erased. Book burning and scholar burying may sound extreme, he reflected wryly, but history is written by the victors. Any philosopher, poet, or priest preaching dissent would find himself outlawed, or worse. Religion posed the greatest challenge. Beliefs ran deeper than any political structure, and Ethan knew he'd need absolute spiritual authority if he hoped to secure lasting loyalty. He considered issuing blunt decrees to ban all existing faiths, replacing them with a cult of the Emperor. My Emperor next door, that golden giant, he thought, referring to the ruler of a neighboring dimension who had ascended through divine right and magical decree. He may shy away from power, but I will embrace it. I will become the supreme divine sovereign, equal parts ruler, god, and savior. He leaned back, picturing the day his banner would fly over 1,000 conquered worlds. No more fractured nations. No more squabbling heroes or rival deities. Only order, unity, and Ethan's vision triumphant. He closed his eyes, steadying himself for the battles ahead. The Hydra Rift would open in his time, and when it did, nothing would stand between him and ultimate dominion. Ethan stood before the Council of Regents, voice calm but resolute. Let every subject of the Empire lay down their ancient walls, he began. Let us forge a single nation, a single people, a single civilization, putting aside notions of superiority and inferiority. He paused, scanning the faces before him. He knew how easily such lofty ideals could founder on harsh realities. The boy's intelligence exceeded that of his years. He understood all too well the obstacles that awaited them. Once the world was united under one banner, diverse ethnicities would inevitably have to find a way to live side by side. History had shown it was not only desirable, but unavoidable. Yet absorbing a smaller race into a larger one was never simple. Differences of blood, language, and custom ran deep, and old hatreds could flare up without warning. That simmering resentment would not simply challenge the throne, it could tear the entire realm apart. Ethan let the weight of his words settle over the chamber. He knew the road to unity would be long and perilous. But if the Empire was to stand, and if peace was to endure, this was the path they must walk together.